And I've recorded 150 episodes of Triangle Squared.
I've recorded 149.
Hello, and welcome to my 150th episode of Triangle Squared, a PlayStation podcast. I'm your host, Brett Beck, and alongside me every week except for that one.
Actually, when you think about it, I'm Saul Bridges, and this is episode lucky 150. But when you think about it, I have recorded 150 episodes.
Oh, dude.
Just nobody's ever known about it.
That is also true, but if we want to go into the depths of that, we've recorded...
Like 154?
We've recorded episodes that were like live stream watch-alongs. We've recorded our impressions episodes. I've recorded stuff when we were at PSX. There's been all sorts of stuff.
Well, those at PSX are actually numbered on YouTube. There's like...
Were they?
Yeah. Well, like a 0.5.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm talking about like we like legitimately recorded an episode like 2 weeks ago, which would have made last week
150.
Yeah, technically.
I thought maybe you were talking about episode 0 that no one's seen, but
no,
you're right.
If that's the case, I have 7 episodes of a Let's Play you don't have on me, so I think I outnumber you there.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Anyway, we are Triangle Squared, a PlayStation podcast, and if this is your first time joining us, first of all, welcome. We talk about PlayStation every week, and of course, everything that has to deal with PlayStation, which means other publishers like EA, Ubisoft, Bethesda, all those things. But we also talk about their competition in the way of manufacturers like Nintendo or Microsoft, things that we see all the companies doing that we'd either like to see Sony mimic and copy because we like, or take their own hand at it, or things that we see the other companies doing that we prefer Sony to not do. Of course, just in our opinions. In the course of this show, despite obviously being big PlayStation fans, go ahead and tell you right now, our goal in this show is to never just completely demean or belittle the people who like Xbox or Xbox as a whole. I've had plenty of times where Xbox and Nintendo both have given me great gaming experiences, and it just so happens that PlayStation does it more for me, so that's where I tend to put my hat. But with that said...
Yeah, we're not Sony ponies.
This is our 150th episode, if we've not already mentioned that a number of times, which we have. And because of that, we like to do these kind of milestone episodes a little differently. We never like them to just feel like they're normal episodes of the show. So with that in mind, we're going to do things a little differently today. One of the things we are going to do is, of course, start the show off the way that we always do, the correct way, and then still going to go through our community's take. But after that, it's going to be a little bit more open structured and us just kind of talking and hanging out and doing what we can. But to that end, with all the stuff we have to talk about, that does not mean that we skip our niceties and our openings, and we say right now, Saul, what have you been up to? Because I legitimately have seen you very little this week.
Yeah,
you seem like you've been busy at work.
I haven't. Well, I mean, at work I was, but like when I got home, I haven't felt great the past couple days / week at this point. So I really haven't played a whole lot, which is a very common saying it seems lately for me. But I've normally I at least hop on Red Dead Online for a day or two out of the week at the very minimal, or Apex or Dark Souls or something, but I haven't hopped on anything this week at all during the week except for Dark Souls 3 for an hour, and that's kind of one of my comfort games. When I don't feel good, I just kind of want to play Dark Souls 3, or when I have a game where I don't want to concentrate on something else, or I don't want to have to concentrate on it, it's going to be Dark Souls 3. But yeah, this week I just haven't felt great at all. And I'm still I still don't feel that great today. But I did.
But you're here and we thank you.
Yes. On Thursday, I watched Final Fantasy 15 Brotherhood, which was the 5-episode anime.
Did you watch it on YouTube since that's where it was originally released?
Yeah.
I figured. It's good. I actually really like it.
It is good, and it fixed a massive problem. I wouldn't even say massive at this point, but it did fix a flaw of the game for me. And that was... And I still think this, because I did play Final Fantasy 15. I'll get to that here in a minute. But one of my biggest things was how Final Fantasy 15 drops you into the world. It has this really cool cutscene of the kingdom and everything around it. But then it drops you into the middle of nowhere, like you pushing a car. Mm-hmm. And it never really expounds, at least early into the game, it never really expounds on who these other people are with you and why you should care about them. Mm-hmm. So... And that's one of my big pet peeves in a game. So I couldn't find a reason to care for them. And when you really think about it, a lot of Final Fantasy games have done really good jobs of giving these characters backstories. Like you think of Yuna from Final Fantasy 10, or you think of Ash from Final Fantasy 12, or even Tifa from Final Fantasy 7, or Barrett. You have these people with these really cool backstories, and you're actually like, dang, these are cool and well written characters.
But you tend to not know that as soon
Mixcraft.
as you come in.
But yeah, just in case the
Backup
episode
audio.
goes down, then you guys will be starting this, and you'll be like, oh, why is the video not there? And it's because of this. But or is Mixcraft just not? Oh, there we go.
No, I had time click in from dealing with music stuff.
Okay,
My bad.
no problem. But,
Anyway, glad, good catch. But one thing real quick, I see some of your points, and to two things, and this is something that I think is definitely up for opinion as to the best way to do it. I think that with 15, they wanted to try and mimic the idea of being able to build out a world like they did with 7 so much, that 7 was like, well, we're going to build out a world from it now because it got popular when we didn't realize it was going to get this popular. So we're going to capitalize on that by continuing to do more within that world. Whereas 15, it was like, well, we want this to be as popular as 7 if possible. So we're going to hit the ground running with multiple movies and tie-ins to build the world. So, you know, Kingsglaive and I think Kingsglaive dropped the same day as Final Fantasy 15, and Brotherhood came out like a month in
which
advance.
is weird because to me, I've heard people say this. Have you seen Kingsglaive?
No, I've yet to watch it.
Okay.
Even though I literally own it with the version of the game I got. But
supposedly it spoils the end of the game, or stuff about the end of the game. That's why you're only supposed to watch it like at a certain, I think it's chapter 12.
well, I think that's where people are now. Like they've come to that. But of course, as they were saying, you watch it whenever you want to originally. But
Yeah.
of course, people will play and figure out where they think the optimal time to introduce that information is. But the other part of my story is, the other part of my thing about that is, while I still see your point, I think almost every Final Fantasy game does a thing of throwing you into characters and letting you see them without explaining who they are or why you should care about them. That's almost every Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy 7 throws you into the beginning of a lot of stuff going on, and you're learning about these people while you're side by side with them. It's almost like an active game thing that they do. I mean, a lot of stories do this, actually. Movies do it as well.
Well,
but I just think that it must be for you a disconnect with how they chose to go about
it's not even that.
building that characters up with you.
I've gotten all the way to Alticia before in this game. There is never once exposition on these other characters in the game. Like there is with Barrett or Tifa or Waka or anybody like that.
Again, differently. And that's why I think it comes down to they are doing it, but they're choosing to execute it in a different way. And I think it depends on how much you care what you're doing. So a lot of it happens, and this is for other games do this to a much better extent. This was their attempt, and a lot of 15 to me is first attempts at things you've never seen in the series, but
That's
to
true.
various degrees of success. One of the things they attempted to do was let natural dialogue that happens in an open world, since we've never had an open world Final Fantasy before necessarily. When it's like, okay, well, now you're going through the open world, traveling is a big part of it. Obviously, the car is a big part of it. So when you're going around and either riding chocobos or driving in the car, you're going to have, because your characters are at a rest, and you're kind of just going through and doing these things, it's like we're going to let natural dialogue happen between these people to try and build a sense of friendship that is natural and not like everything is forced lines that were scripted. Instead, it's like, oh, well, we're in the car. I'm going to tell you a story or do something that shows who I am as a character and what my interests are.
Yeah, but
and again, it does it to various degrees of success.
The problem with this, though, is that every one of these characters have known Noctis, and specifically Prompto has known Noctis since they were at least 12 years old. And the game never makes you feel like that. To me, now that I've known that, I've been looking for that. I have yet to see that these guys have grown up with each other. Gladio's known him since he was a teenager, and Ignis, I believe, more towards like college. But even then, it's just like one of those things. Was what Brotherhood taught me was, hey, Brotherhood is this 5 episode arc going over each character and why they are important to Noctis's journey. And I loved it for that, but it's not in the game. And that's the issue. And that's why Brotherhood fixed that problem for me.
And to give you credit to that, it's impossible for me as someone who watched Brotherhood before playing 15. It's impossible for me. It's probably that everything I saw within 15 was like, oh, yeah, it's happened back into what I saw in Brotherhood.
Yeah.
And
I didn't know that's what Brotherhood was. I thought Brotherhood was, and it kind of is, but I thought Brotherhood was a simple lead up of little events that lead to the intro of the game. And that kind of is what happens with the whole fighting the demon snake in Brotherhood. That's an overarching story that actually happens, and then they drive the car off, and presumably later in that trip, because that's that same trip with them going to Otisia, is where they break down, and that's where the game starts. But the thing was that Brotherhood taught me was that, hey, these people have known each other. Prompto's story was really well done. Mm-hmm. That should have been in the game. I'm fine that it's not, because Brotherhood's a free media that you can go and watch. But damn it, was that like
if you had to pay for Brotherhood, different. I would actually feel.
That's how I feel about the DLC.
Well, the DLC, and we'll get to that in a minute. I mean, I don't want to rehash too much of last week's episode because.
I think it's going a little bit differently though, just because I am to this extent enjoying myself a little bit more. I'm still facing the problems that I had with 15 originally, and that is if you go around in 15's world, the world is just so empty.
Yes, it's very empty. And the problem with it is it's too big. I actually think the world would feel more populated if they would have shrunk the size of it down.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to do it too much, or if they just populate the world like they do in Final Fantasy 15 or 14. 14's world, you can't walk 100 steps in one direction without coming across at least 2 monsters. Or it's very rare that in some spots that you can't. But yeah, Final Fantasy 15, like I said in the last week's episode, the story always seemed interesting, even though the more I'll play it now, it's like, this is kind of 12 story in a really loose way. But yeah, the story is interesting. The characters are now interesting to me. The designs and stuff of all the characters are really cool. It's just getting through the game at the points like what I'm doing now. I am in chapter 2, so I am 2 chapters before Altisia, I think, or is it 4? I think Altisia is chapter 6. But
I don't remember.
I'm still kind of in that spot of I'm doing nothing but fetch quest in a way. Like it was go talk to Cindy. Oh, Cindy, go save this guy named Dave. Oh, Dave, go do this bounty hunt. Then Dave will take you back, and then you gotta go find Core. And Core's like, hey, go to this royal tomb. And then you get to that royal tomb. He's like, hey, go to this other royal tomb. There's a lot of exposition in those parts, but with the whole startup, the
in between of the parts when you're traveling and just like,
it's almost like,
so boring.
Yeah, it's almost like what people said with Death Stranding was that the story moments were really well done, but in between it, they found it tedious. And I can see that, and that's kind of my ordeal with Final Fantasy 15. But I am enjoying myself more.
Yeah. I
still don't know if I will ever finish the game. I'm going to certainly try. I don't know if I'm going to have any more time today to play any more of it. But yeah, like at this point, I'm doing what I said I'll do, and I've said before millions of times. I will never take a game that has had any interest to me and shut it down try to shut it down in one go. I'll at least always give it a second chance. I did it with Nier, and that was the game that really taught me my lesson. Was that I did it with Nier, and it became one of my favorite games of the generation.
Yeah,
and that game didn't even have the fundamental problems that Final Fantasy has to me. That game just didn't catch my interest. The same with Witcher 3. I may go back. Ironically, Final Fantasy 15 is very reflective of Witcher 3 to me. Witcher 3, I didn't play the first 2 games, so I couldn't connect with the characters or the world. This game, I kind of feel the same way. I can't connect to the characters, but that's not because there's games prior to that. It's just because in the game, they're not really done as well as I'd like them to be.
Well, and there is other
Brotherhood,
media.
then Brotherhood gave me the reasons why now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same kind of way. The quest can seem a little fetchy in nature, but there are really cool story quests in between. And I'm giving it my all. Where I think I'll tie the line is that if I get to chapter, I think that the way you're supposed to play is that at chapter 7, you're supposed to watch Kingsglaive. I think. It might, no, I'm thinking of when to play a character. I think chapter 12 is when you watch Kingsglaive. I forgot what it is.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to interject these character DLCs and stuff in between. And
maybe when you play it that way, it is a lot better of experience. But I do think it's at least a worthy experience. It's a hard word to use, worthy, because that's a very subjective. But I mean, clearly there's a lot there that was still good the first time around after so much into it. The start is slow for a number of reasons. I think that, again, there are various degrees of success of trying to do different things. In the beginning, I think they're trying to give you a sense of, oh, well, you're just supposed to be out and doing all these things, and you think you're having this free experience with all these people, but then you are met with the weight and grief of your father's death and all the things that come with that.
Spoilers.
And but it's super early game, and it was communicated across all the marketing.
End of chapter 1.
So I don't mind saying that. But it is interesting going back to your Brotherhood point that maybe it shouldn't have been reliant on Brotherhood, but thankfully it was free and it was out before the game. So at least everybody had the opportunity to just as long as you had time to spare, more or less, you could watch it. But you were talking about, and again, I couldn't experience it that way. You might be right on it never feeling like these people have known each other for a long time. But to me, when I watched Brotherhood and started playing the game, I was like, yeah, this is exactly what you'd expect from what Brotherhood sets up. It's like, okay, these are people who've known Noctis for a long time, but they've known him as a teenager and a kid, and it's almost all of them have been people who are tangentially tied to him because of his royalty and his status and his father.
Like Gladio being his bodyguard.
So it's almost like
they're being his cook.
Yeah, so the game does a lot of things that show and reflect, these are two people that just feel like they feel like they're having to babysit, or I should say this, the game actually does a lot to show that they care about Noctis, but Noctis is kind of in this world of like, do they only care about me because they were supposed to and maybe they were paid to by my father? And the game actually does a lot eventually throughout the game, you'll see, to make it to where it's like, oh no, this actually is a tight-knit group of friends, of people who, while brought together for that really superfluous reason, they actually did forge their own friendship and stuff together. And like I said, the game is a real mixed pot of success and failure. It truly is.
And I honestly think that like if what I'm playing through, like, because like I said, I am enjoying it more, but like I really do think that it was one of those things of seeing, Royal Edition, and it's kind of like, well, that is the definitive way to play the game. But a Final Fantasy, a massive single player style story that's high fantasy shouldn't rely on something like that. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad that it's there now. To me, it still kind of makes me mad about launch, and it's almost, with this whole experience, I'm almost have come to the conclusion that I will not get Final Fantasy Remake on launch. Final Fantasy 7. I decided what I'm going to do. I'm not going to wait until it's all out. I'm going to wait until see what the second chapter brings and where you're at the end. Because that's going to give me a good scope of how long this will all be.
Sure. So you mean more of like, let people play it for like a month or so and kind of be able to look up an idea of where you would be in that without going too far.
Well, I know where it's going to be after the first chapter. I'm talking about chapter 2.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. But...
No, well, yeah. Well, I mean, even then, we know where chapter 1's ending and nobody's touched it.
No. Okay, I get what you're saying. Not chapter of the game. The episode,
I guess, yeah.
Release. Okay, yes, I understand.
I want to be able to see like, episode 2 is coming out and you're going to end it here or there in the story. And I'm like, okay, now I know that this covers 40 hours at least. So then, hey, I can start this. I can start chapter 1, 40 hours or a month before it comes out. Oh, excuse me. A month before it comes out. And then I know that, hey, I will lead into chapter 2 perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. And by then I'm going to get it on sale. Because like I said, I'm super excited for the game. I cannot be overwhelmed with excitement when I don't know where it's going to go.
Fair.
And how it's going to do it. But what about you? What have you been playing this week?
So I've been in a similar boat of really busy, but also feeling bad various times. And of course, it was Valentine's Day. I hope everybody had a good Valentine's Day or a Palentine's Day. If you didn't have a direct love interest romantically, maybe you had a good buddy that y'all got together and went out and enjoyed each other's company. Valentine's Day does not have to be about a significant other in the romantic sense. I think that there's plenty of room to let people that just mean a lot to you get some benefits out of the day. But so with that, I did go and we had Friday night out. Didn't have to have my kid. It was great. It all lined up. I really didn't expect it, but my mom ended up watching Kyrie for us, and we got to go out and have a really good night. So I haven't played
pizza.
I haven't. There you go. I haven't played a game at all this weekend. I haven't played a game since Wednesday. And all I've played this week prior to that was more of the Kingdom Hearts Remind DLC, which I have now beaten. Got the which is hard, man. Ooh, that's that because
I've seen you in Discord talking about it.
I beat the original version of the game on Proud, so my continue save file is Proud. It's not normal, so I'm fighting all these data boss things. And the main game was not hard at all on Proud, but these data battles are a lot harder. But really good and super fun. And similar to the Final Fantasy thing, I feel like some of the in terms of the type of quantity, the type of content that this is, which is hard battles that you do after you beat the main story. I do think some of those should have been in the base game because every other game has always had that. But either way, I really enjoyed that, and it sets up so much interesting stuff at the end with its cutscene. I
did watch both the ending cutscenes.
Is it not?
I think you're right.
Dude, was it not chilling though? Like when it happened, I was like, I don't know why this is hitting me so hard, but what an amazing reuse of something that you would never expect.
Yeah, I think you're right. Even though the ending technically didn't confirm it, it almost feels like that's
There's so much stuff going on that makes you think like, where do you go next? And you know what I love about it? Good on Tetsuya for this thing.
Well, that's what I don't get. Where are we going to go from this? This was supposed to be the end of the Dark Seeker saga.
Yeah, but it's not about the Dark Seeker thing. Was all in regards to Xehanort. So now that Xehanort's not here,
I guess
we
so.
presumably move forward to the Master of Masters and understanding the deeper. Under everything that goes into the lore in the world. But, without saying too much, it does make me wonder if we are going to continue to actually play as Sora in the next game or not.
Maybe we'll actually move over to...
it would be really interesting to allow Sora as a character to still be in the series, but he's no longer the main protagonist. I'm curious, because there's some interviews that Tetsuya did, and where he talks about, like, at the beginning, he really loved Sora, and Sora was, like, analogous to him as a boy and all these things. But as the story progressed and what he decided that what he wanted to do and whatnot, like, he kind of became disconnected. As he's aged, he's become disconnected to Sora because Sora's, like, so pure and innocent, but nobody's really like that. So he's like, ironically, I found myself, that's what Tetsuya was saying, ironically, he's found himself liking and being more open, or at least more I'm trying to think of the word. I don't know why I can't think of it. Like you don't necessarily agree, but you understand, more related, I guess, to the villains in the series.
Well, I wonder if...
So it would be interesting if the move here is to move away from Sora, who is this pure light, and still be able to use him in the story for what you need in terms of there's a lot of benefits that come from this person of pure joy and light or whatever. But now we get to move over to a character that maybe has a little bit more depth. Maybe he has anger and things that go on that we can pull into this story that we don't normally get to see from Sora, which they did try and tap into in Kingdom Hearts 3 a little bit.
Yeah.
But really interesting, and I loved it. For the most part, I thought the DLC was worth the money. So,
well, let's see. Say you play as I don't know why I always forget his name. Noctis's twin.
His twin or Yozora?
Yozora.
Okay. Just the person who looks a lot like Noctis.
Yeah. What if you play as Yozora in Final Fantasy 4, Kingdom Hearts 4, and then you end up kind of going down a darker path, and then the only person to bring you back is Sora, and that's the last boss battle.
Bang, 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 bang.
That'd
Who
be
knows?
cool.
There's a lot of interesting stuff, but Kingdom Hearts as a series is doing a lot of interesting stuff, and I applaud them for capitalizing on the... I don't know how they did it. A series that's been going on this long, randomly tapping into a new audience, and Kingdom Hearts 3 is selling gangbusters, but they did it.
Did Remod actually add any context, or no, I say even context, but any kind of revelations to the story other than that last cutscene, or was that pretty much the only story stuff in it?
No, there's a lot of stuff in the end.
Okay.
So what you do, the beginning of Remind, is you play through the end of the game again. But you play through the end of the game with a lot of... So it's essentially like, it is the end of the game. You do something that takes you back in time in a weird way to the ending of the game.
To add Scala, I'm sure.
Well, you do get to go around and actually explore it, which is awesome.
That's
that's
good, because you couldn't do that in the first time.
But essentially, there's when you first start the DLC, there's a ton of dialogue and a ton of stuff you start to kind of pick up on and understand and be like, okay, like it answers some question, adds a lot of them, and then kind of makes you go, they clearly are not done with this franchise.
How much how much is this? 30? I might actually pick this up.
But either way, so there's probably about replaying through the entire end of the game with a lot more content and a lot more context to what's going on in a very different way.
It's a lot like Final Fantasy 14 or 15's fixed chapter.
It's a little different, but yeah, I personally would have preferred to have this in the game.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people said about the fixed stuff in 15.
Yeah,
that still kind of makes me mad that only that fix is in Royal. It's only in Royal.
I just have to see what it is, because
I don't want to look into it, but like literally somebody was saying that
we'll discuss it when you're done.
Yeah, because I'm going to fully look in to see what was the difference, because apparently if something was linear, now it's open, and there's something else in there that wasn't there originally, and then that only was in Royal. Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned on Twitter, I am playing, if you haven't been able to tell, I've been playing more DLC this year for games I've missed. So I asked, and there was a very split way tie between the DLC for The Witcher 3, the Frozen Wilds DLC, and Bloodborne: The Old Hunters.
You know what would be fun?
What's that?
We were just joking about having a one-a-month Patreon exclusive video game club where we play through something for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I've never played through Old Hunters.
Neither have I.
And that was on the thing as one of the highest voted ones, so...
Maybe we do start
we take a trek into Bloodborne.
You know what? If you are interested, it was kind of a joke, but also like a real discussion going on prior to recording. If you would be interested in this is something we'd be doing for patrons, just to add some value to that and kind of give them something back for supporting us. Thank you guys, really, for 100. It's not been supporting us for 150 episodes through Patreon specifically, but many of you who are patrons are people who've been supporting us for close to 150 episodes. So thank you guys. But if you would like to see and participate in a Patreon-wide, no matter what tier you're at, it's essentially going to be like a video game club, kind of like a book club, where we choose one game that none of us have ever played a month, like me and Saul, or one that we've played but haven't played in a long time. Play it, go through it, and then sit down and kind of talk about our experience with it. And it's going to be a more pointed conversation about one thing individual and kind of looking at the game in a bunch of different ways and talking about it. If you'd like that and would like to be able to participate in that, and what we'd probably do is take some of the patron comments we got about the game and interject them in the episode, then let us know if you'd be interested, and we'd do that, see about doing that. But yeah, so I don't know which one I'm going to start. Maybe we'll wait and see what you guys think. But I'm going to go ahead and go into the community's take question real quick. Of course, last week we were talking about Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general, and how people stood on the fence of different people stood on different sides of the fence based off of whether people who already have an established name should be able to use it or something else, or if it should be reserved for literally kickstarting people. And I think there was a lot of good points made on both sides to some extent. But I'm going to hear you guys. So our community stake question this week was, what are your thoughts on Kickstarter being used for games, as we were talking about it specifically for games? Have you ever backed a game? If so, did that help or hurt your opinion of crowdfunding? So over on Twitter, Mr. Sweet Jones, our buddy Ryan, has said, I've never backed anything, but I think even big pubs should experiment with it. It's a good way to gauge actual interest in a product that is potentially a huge investment. Like eHarmony, people aren't going to F around when they have skin in the game. Example, PlayStation could put up a Kickstarter for Tourist Trophy 2, Tourist Trophy being a little-known PS2 racer game made by the team over at Polyphony Digital, the team behind Gran Turismo. Anyway, set the goal for the most of the cost, and if it gets there, great. If not, they have great insight into what it might actually sell if they decided to publish it. And I think that that's a great idea, actually. There's been a couple of people throughout these responses that kind of said that there is a use for it on the bigger publisher side, but it needs to be in looking at franchises that otherwise, or IP rather, that otherwise the people are sitting on and not utilizing. This is a way to look at breathing new life into those IPs in a way that would sell, because you'd be able to gauge interest through something like this. That's actually a great idea. Do a couple more real quick over here. There was one I really wanted to talk about that came through here, but I'm going to grab a couple, and when we come across it, I'll see it. Vinny Jimmy over here, howdy. He says, howdy. Crowdfunding is a great way for indie games to gain some traction and get made. I do feel like there need to be better protections for backers, as I have fallen victim of backing a game and the developers stop development and just run with the money, though their goal was met. And I do definitely agree with that general sense.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Saul seems like he had something to say about that. Is there an exact?
I'm just pointing because I highly agree with that. Like, there's not enough protections into place on Kickstarter for stuff like that. I mean, sure that there is ways that you can get your money back from Kickstarter for stuff that falls through, but you get scummy enough developers on there, or people who just want to make edgy Steam games that get all this money, and then they put out a final product that really didn't use any of that money and stuff, and it puts a bad name on things.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's someone who already made a game and then just chose to show specific parts of it and say it was a game that they were starting to make, and then
made something
get
else.
all the money, and then just essentially sit on that game until some time has passed. Be like, hey, here's my final product that you got. It's just, you're
Somebody's
right.
done that.
There's not enough of a. I mean, technically, the Wonderful 101 remaster is not far from that. Essentially, what it's looking like from all that was going on here is that the game is already done. Since they're planning on releasing the game in March, all it came down to was getting extra funding to be able to extend that remaster onto not only the Switch but the PS4 and the PC.
Didn't Cliff Bleszinski do that with the game? Like, didn't he take money that people were supposed to be putting into Lawbreakers, and then made that terrible Battle Royale game that lasted like a week?
I don't know. Radical Heights was the name of the game you're talking about.
Yeah.
The Battle Royale. I'm not sure. That's actually a good question.
Like, I swear, I feel like that somebody's done that, where they promised a thing and then they brought something else out, and they were like, well, what about this? And he's like, oh yeah, I got all that already. And it wasn't
Not sure.
Really wasn't finished.
Let's see over here. We have Mr. Constantly Kenny, one of our patrons. Thank you so much, man. He says, I've backed many game projects on Kickstarter. I do take a bit of time to check out the campaign and the people running it before I back them, but I haven't been disappointed yet. I think crowdfunding it can be good for gauging interest, big company or indie. Lots of old IP I want, which goes back to what I was talking about of using it as a tool to really look at old IP that people ask about often, but don't have a way other than just talking about it to show you that there's interest in it. You can kind of do the put your money where your mouth is thing. Kickstarter is good for that. It's set up to where either you meet your goal or you don't. If you put it up there and say, hey, here's my goal, here's what we have as a plan, and here's a really, really rough demo of what we could do with it. How interested are you? Let's look at it right now. Put your money where your mouth is or not. With that, we could see the return of franchises that people love, like Sly Cooper. We could see that come back around and see what people want out of it, and if there's interest for another one. You could see it with even older IP, something crazy like a Motor Tune Grand Prix, which was another game made by Polyphony Digital for the PS1 that most people probably don't know about. But again, it just gives you a lot of options and lets you kind of go through and say, hey, what are you interested in? And would this be one to do it? Bethesda can look and say, hey, people have been talking about Fallout 3 Remastered for so long, and even though they're talking about it, we don't know if they'd buy it. Well, hey, here's our Kickstarter for Fallout 3 Remastered. Would you be doing that? That's a poorer example because I think that's clearly a game that has an audience. But nonetheless, it's a way to gauge interest in old IPs. You got anything to add to that one, Saul?
No, you covered it pretty well.
Over on, actually, I'll throw one more in there. Mr. Blake says, it doesn't matter to me when companies do it. I don't think it's a negative thing, but I have also never backed any, so I'm not sure. And I think that's a really honest answer, just kind of looking at it from the standpoint of like, you know what, there's no way to specifically tell. So,
yeah.
Over on Facebook, Mr. Josh Ayers, another one of our patrons. Thank you, sir. Hope you're doing well. He says, I don't think Kickstarter is bad or good. For most, it seems to be a show of interest for other investors. Shenmue 3 having a Kickstarter campaign, then being funded the remaining money by Deep Silver and Sony comes to mind. But then there are the recent Platinum Games examples of just a developer wanting to release a game and the publisher doesn't want to. So as long as you know what you're getting into, I don't see the harm. And one more over there from Mr. Derek Porter, another one of our patrons. Thank you, man. He says, first, I have never backed a game on Kickstarter. It's one of those things where you get what you pay for, and some, not all, Kickstarter projects tend to be pretty rough and not up to par with what I look for in a game. However, I can see how it can be used by indie game creators to get their creativity realized. On the other hand, I don't like Kickstarter being used by more well-established creators or developers. As the name implies, crowdfunding websites should be a Kickstarter for those without the available resources at their disposal. Established creators should be able to bring in investors, publishers based on their work, and shouldn't have to use crowdfunding to do so. I've got to remember the name of the site, Derek, but there actually is. I want to say it's like Barry or something like that. Give me a second.
I kind of agree with him though. What he's saying is like a reputable publisher / brand. It would seem that going off their reputation that they would be able to get the funding they would want for a game. But also on the double edge of that is that not always will they ever get the money for it. Sometimes they have a game idea that's so crazy that no studio wants to publish it and then therefore won't fund it and stuff like that. So there's been movies before where people had a crazy idea movie and nobody wanted to fund it, so they funded it themselves. And it's not always successful, but that could just be the case.
So I was pretty close with it being Barry. It's Fig. So Fig is actually a crowdfunding site that's a little different. And this, I think, is where it really exists in the best of both worlds. So whereas Kickstarter, I do think, is probably better to allow people to just look at it and say, hey, this is for people who have nothing. On the side where you're talking about, like what Saul was just saying as well, just because you have a name in the industry does not mean that people are going to look at every single idea you have. Even if a bunch of the fans you have would love the idea, it doesn't mean that it's a risk that these companies would be willing to take. And a great example of that is Psychonauts. So Double Fine Productions, of course, put out Psychonauts way back in the PS2 era. And people love the game. It was a cult classic. It's something that kind of blew up more so after its release, and people really wanted to see another one. So what we ended up seeing was them come and go, you know what, for us to do that, we're going to need some money. But their way of doing it was different. They went to a site called Fig, and I could be wrong. I want to say maybe they were even somehow responsible with being one of the first games on the site. But essentially, the idea is that when you're backing the game, you're actually backing it as an investor and not as just someone who's pre-buying the product. So you, depending on the amount of money you put into it, it's also the amount of money you will get back. It's bases how much money you could get back off of it if it's a massive success.
Yes.
So it kind of exists in that middle ground of where you're talking about of if you have an idea, but your normal investors and publishers do not entertain it, but you want to come to people and say, hey, you as an individual can actually become an investor for something that you would like to see made. This is a way to do it. I think this exists in a much different way. And for people who have slightly deeper pockets, there's more reason for them to do that. You know, if Kickstarter was your only option and you had a lot of money and you had pretty deep pockets and you go, well, you know what, I really would love to see Psychonauts 2. I'm just going to go ahead and dump $50,000 in backing on it just because I can. Well, the only thing you're still really getting is whatever the highest Kickstarter reward is. Whereas on this, you go, you know what? I loved Psychonauts 2. I really believe in this. I have $50,000 I could slap on it, and that's going to give me $50,000 worth of investment that I could see a return of. Right. And I love that. So go check out Fig. Psychonauts 2 did go on there by Double Fine, and the campaign, their goal was $3,300,000. They got $3,829,000, so 116% of their goal. And I just think that's a great idea. I mean, clearly they got extra funding elsewhere, but it gave the people who are doing this have some money to come back into it. And I'm actually curious. I'd have to look, but I'm a little curious if there's a way that this is a little bit more structured because of it being considered an investment. You know,
that could be a thing too, because
maybe this helps with the pitfalls. But go ahead, sorry.
Investments get weird too with being. If they're actually marketed as an investment or not, because with those, don't you have to pay taxes and stuff on those too?
I don't know. So on this site over here, it actually says there are two different ways you can back this game: traditional crowdfunding rewards and investments. So you can choose to go about it more along the Kickstarter side if you want to, or you can actually choose to become an investor in it. So it looks like it's a competition for Kickstarter that just has the added benefit of giving you the ability to invest in the game, which I think is cool. So personally, I think that's probably close to what you're looking at. I'm going to do a couple more of these, and then we're going to get moving off. But thank you guys. Really appreciate you. Over in our Discord, we got Mr. Atlas Unchained, another one of our patrons. Thank you so much. And we don't just bring the ones up of people that are patrons. It just happens to be that our patrons are really active and like to give us their input, and we appreciate it. He says, I've never personally backed anything on Kickstarter, but I see no problem with it. As a supporter, you are acknowledging the risk of putting money towards something that may well just be in the conceptual stage. There are bad examples like Mighty No. 9 and arguably Ukulele, but that's on the fault of developers. I see it as a valid way to fund a project. And I really, that's where I'm at as well. You can't let the bad examples in any given thing be the reason that you don't do things. I mean, is what it is. There's a lot of bad things that happen. There's people that wreck cars and can kill people on accident, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't necessarily get out there and drive. It's just part of it. There's a risk inherent in everything that you do. So with that said, though, we appreciate you guys giving your feedback. And from here, we are going to go into our episode, which is going to be a lot different. We're going to be openly talking about things that are going on, but in an effort to try and at least not ramble or go like that, we do have a couple list of things that we wanted to talk about. And one of those... Don't
discuss the top one. That's the one I want to talk the most about.
Oh, really? Yeah. I was actually... I didn't know if you would be, but I'm most interested in your opinion on it for one reason, but we'll talk about it soon.
That's the one that's the one I want to talk about the most.
So the first thing...
The focal point of the episode, if you will.
So the first thing is, and you guys may have seen this, of course, if you follow us on Twitter, as I mentioned it, as it was not something I was too happy about, but it is what it is. EA have announced that Ghost Games, the developer that's been behind Need for Speed for so long, is going to be renamed into EA Gothenburg, and they're shifting it into a support studio, which I think is a shame. There's a lot of developers that have been shifted over into support studios despite making some really great games. And with that, they're going to be sending the franchise back over to Criterion Games. So if you remember, Criterion was originally the team behind Burnout, and the the founders of it have actually left and gone on to do their own thing. So Criterion now is just a namesake, really, which happens to a lot of studios. Doesn't mean that they're any better or worse, but Criterion was responsible for Need for Speed from about 2010-ish to 2013 when the game was still being made yearly. And they were also a helping developer on Ghost Game's first Need for Speed game, which was Need for Speed Rivals, a PS3 game. So with that in mind, there's a couple of reasons as to why they're saying these things are happening. So the first thing is that, like I said, they're getting renamed to EA Gothenburg. Most of their creative team is going to be positioned over and transferred into Criterion, with some of the others being just moved within EA in general. And the reason that EA has chose to go with on this is that they've had an inability to attract the talent wanted to Gothenburg to work on the series, while Criterion, being based in Guildford, allows a more diverse group of people as one of UK's biggest game development hubs. So, fancy speak for apparently people didn't want to move to Sweden, which is where Gothenburg is. But since there's already people at UK in Guildford, then you're dealing with the fact of, or in England rather, but you have a bigger group of people to go ahead and go with without having to attract them to move out to where you are. I'm bummed on this one, but I think Saul is a little probably different on this one for the main fact of, Saul, have you played any of the Need for Speed games this generation?
No. That's why it doesn't really bother me or affect me any, so I don't really have an opinion on it or anything. I know that some people loved the later games made by Criterion. Some people hated them. So it kind of just is a catch-22.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it kind of depends on where you were in the series. So, like, it's not something that interests you as much anymore, but, like, if you had to, what was your favorite Need for Speed game? Like
Carbon.
Carbon. Okay, that's actually mine as well, of the older style.
And that was the last one I played, actually.
So when you're going through that, you're looking at Carbon, and there's a lot more in Carbon, a lot more in common with Carbon, Underground 2, and Most Wanted. There's a lot more in common with those games and the Need for Speed 2015 and definitely Heat. And a lot less in common with those games, which is what a lot of people view as the golden age of Need for Speed, and definitely was the golden age from a sales perspective, than what Criterion was doing. Criterion was all about, well, hey, it's just racing. It's a lot more like Burnout. There's no car customization. All you do is you can change colors of your car by rolling through. It's essentially like they tried taking Criterion, who made Burnout Paradise, which I think, did you play Burnout Paradise?
Yeah.
Okay, so Burnout Paradise, great game.
That was the last 360 Burnout game, wasn't it?
It was the last Burnout game in general.
Yeah.
Sadly.
But that was the one that got remastered too. Like,
it did.
2 years ago? A year ago?
Yeah, something like that. But it did, and it was a great game, and played to the strengths of what Burnout did by expanding it in a bigger way as well. But essentially what happened is they took Criterion away from Burnout and said, you know what, Need for Speed's already got a name on it, why don't you just use it and let Criterion make essentially the same game, but under the Need for Speed brand, which inherently makes a game that does just not feel like any of what people were really wanting out of Need for Speed. But it came at a time when Need for Speed was kind of needing to change, because they kept having the same developer try to restrike the same lightning, and it wasn't happening. So EA Black Box closed down, and instead they let Criterion go after it. But Criterion they chose a really, really odd choice, in my opinion. They chose to let Criterion chose to reboot Most Wanted, which is one of the most celebrated Need for Speed games, and make it nothing like the original Most Wanted. There's absolutely zero car customization. It's a pretty game. Looks great. It drives all right, pretty well. I mean, when you're playing it, it feels all right to control, but it has pretty much nothing of what was of value to the Need for Speed Most Wanted game originally. And it just seems weird to me, where I exist on this a little differently from you, and I'm at least curious as to what you think about this. Why would you feel the need and urgency to create Ghost Games, who originally were called EA Gothenburg, let them become their own studio that's solely responsible for Need for Speed, because Criterion clearly was not getting it done? Why would you feel the need to take it from Criterion just to go about all your business here and give it directly back to the studio that at one point in time you thought couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's a stupid. It's what I like to call an EA move. It just doesn't make sense. Like I don't get why they did it, and it could just be because there's maybe they didn't spend enough money and they needed to make a whole new studio. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, there's a couple
things. Not even to
things.
make a whole new studio, but to really fully employ a whole new studio.
The problem I have with that thought process, on the surface level, is it brought me back to the old Voss Far Cry 3 quote. Do you know the definition of insanity?
Yeah,
doing the same thing over and over again and
that's
expecting
also
a different outcome.
Not a Voss quote. That's like a quote.
Oh, no. Of course it is. Of course it is. But in gaming, a lot of people first came across it because of Voss. With that being said, on the surface level, that's what it sounds like. So you took it away from a developer to create a new developer to home it, and now you're just giving it back. So under that logic, it's a joke, but it's like, so are we going to see Ghost Games come back and get the franchise 7 years from now, since Ghost had it for about 7 years? But the bigger thing I actually think may be going on here, and to their credit, when Criterion had it, the series was still being forced to be made every year. When Ghost got given it, they got given the ability to make it every 2 years, which I do think had a huge impact on the game's quality.
Right.
So there's that. I would assume that going back to Criterion, at least this time, the studio would be given 2 years in between each release, which would realistically probably be 3 years for making the game as they split up teams. But the other side of that is we just saw Europe go through Brexit, and even though we're of course on this side of the pond, we're in the U.S. And it means a lot less to me. Brexit does, because it doesn't affect me, so it's not something I've had enough time or need to look into. Though the people who are clearly negatively affected by it, I feel for you, but I'm curious if this is actually in part due to Brexit, because Gothenburg is in Sweden, and Sweden is, as far as I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong. I know we have a lot of UK listeners, European listeners. As far as I can tell, I think Sweden is no longer going to be, the UK is no longer going to be part of the European nation altogether. Mm-hmm. I'm butchering the exact thing of it, but Sweden is going to be different. So I wonder if this is a necessary move as far as EA is concerned, because of the stuff that's going around Brexit and its impact on the economy, which would mean that what they're talking about with not being able to attract people there very well might be
like a reason,
half-truth.
Yeah.
Like it's a truth that doesn't really say why the reason actually was.
I could see that.
I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. But, the biggest thing I think that's a shame here is that with this going on and kind of shrinking them down to a support studio, when I think that they actually have made two very, very good games. I think Need for Speed 2015 and Need for Speed Heat are two examples of a series really coming back around, and at least for me personally, bringing my interest back to a series that had long died. And it long died because of Criterion. I don't think that Criterion were doing what Need for Speed needed when Need for Speed was in its super experimental stage late throughout the PS3 gen as a whole. Really, that's when they did, like, you had Need for Speed Carbon, which was like a cross-gen game,
right?
And then you had Need for Speed Shift and Shift 2, which are like hardcore racing games. Then you had Need for Speed Run, which was like trying to make it an action movie where you could get out and control the character free of the car, which was like a really weird move. Then you had them try and come back to the Carbon thing with a game.
No game's done that right, though. Like, no racing game has done that to my knowledge. Somebody let me know if I'm wrong. I know Ryan would be one of the first. But is there a good racing game where you actually get out of your car and explore?
I don't think so, and I think because it goes directly against what a racing game is intended to be.
Well, I mean, kind of. Look at Tony Hawk Underground. You get off your skateboard and move around and stuff, but the game's still 10 out of 10.
But it's in the aid of skateboarding.
It is, but yeah.
Skate is, too. Like, you get off your board and run around and skate, but it's to the aid of skateboarding.
And I guess that's my point in a way, is like, it is kind of what the Fast and the Furious movies have become. Like, it's you separate it in that way, it almost becomes a different genre. It's no longer racing, it's action.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like my big issue with that is it would almost be as if BioWare brought back every single original person on the Mass Effect games, and they made 3 new Mass Effects that were amazing, a brand new trilogy, and they were harkened back. And then they decided, let's just bring back the team for Andromeda. Like they had something so good, why ruin it? And I mean, that's controversial because people like Criterion versions. People like
there are
the EA
definitely people
versions.
that like them, and there's people that really don't think that Ghost have done a good job.
But it's just weird, and it's almost just, to me, it doesn't make any sense, and I don't see why they're doing it this way. And I can't, like, you maybe with the whole Brexit thing, maybe, possibly something like that's going on with them. I don't know.
Well, maybe it's in an effort to shrink the studio to where the size will make sense from a support studio thing, but in terms of having a full studio that's over a really long running big franchise like Need for Speed, having that workforce bolstered up and that's inside the UK may be the better way to go about it. I don't know. It's something that
I guess for real, like,
it's harder to tell.
We won't be able to put a full judgment on it until we see the next Criterion game.
I really think, and the bigger reason for that I find so weird is that's why I think there's something fishy going on outside of that. Because if you're moving the majority of the creative team from Ghost Games over to Criterion, that means the people who were in charge of the main reason of how the last games focused and worked, the creative people who determined like, hey, this is what we want to do.
They're gone.
No, they're going to Criterion.
Well, I mean, yeah, but where are the ones at Criterion going? They're gone.
I don't know about Criterion. So yeah, if you love the Criterion ones, it may actually not be what you wanted with it going back to Criterion.
Like,
it may be Criterion in name only, but a racing game in Ghost completely, at least as far as the main functions of the game style is. Now, the one thing that may happen is if any of the developers are still there. Well, they said it's Need for Speed.
Well, no, I'm saying, like, what if this ends up not even being for Need for Speed? Like, watch the next Criterion Racing game not be called Need for Speed.
Yeah, I don't know. The reason I bring that up is that Need for Speed, and I think one of the only reasons that EA still actually puts a lot of stock in it, is it's the oldest racing franchise around, if I'm not mistaken. It's like one of the longest running franchises ever.
I think Gran Turismo outdates it, doesn't it?
I don't think so.
I thought Gran Turismo 1 came out like 2 years on PS1 before Need for Speed did.
Sorry, Gran Turismo 1 came out in 97.
Yeah, and I think didn't Need for Speed come out in 99 or even 98?
I think it was before that. 94.
What? On what system?
We will find that out. On
Super Nintendo?
On 3DO and Microsoft DOS Windows, PlayStation and Sega Saturn.
Dang, I did not know that the series is that.
And actually,
old.
you know what? I'm going to bring up Ridge Racer. Anyway,
I know Ridge Racer is probably from that same.
They've talked about it. So Ridge Racer first released in '93. It's one of the only other ones, but Ridge Racer's also not been active. Mm-mm. So when you look at it in that sense, Need for Speed has always been active since its inception, and I think there's a lot of pride in that. So I do think it's a big reason for them to keep it going. When you're EA and you have some visual problems in terms of, or some optics problems where people are looking at you in a lot of weird ways, I think having a franchise that's been long running and active that people love in various degrees in various ways is probably a smart thing.
Yeah.
It's like a constant, when every other franchise goes between a lot of different things. Like, well, hey, look, we still got Need for Speed, that thing that you loved back in '94 when you were first going. So I don't know. It's an interesting development there, but we will see how that ends up working out. The next thing, you guys may remember back in E3 when we even did our watch along for it, Square Enix teased a game called Outriders. Didn't bring much up or show much. It was a really, really light tease. But now we've been given a full reveal of the game. It's going to be a cover story or it is a cover story, I should say, for Game Informer. There's a lot of stuff going on for there. But it's showcased as a cross-gen, drop-in, drop-out co-op shooter set in a dark sci-fi world. And I'm going to kind of do the spiel and then we'll talk about it. The game aims for a strong narrative found in linear shooters with the added fun of a AAA co-op shooter experience with different classes for up to 3 friends to play together, while insisting that they will not be a games as a service title. No plans for loot boxes or the like, with the company stating, quote, players will be getting a complete experience out of the box, end quote. And you can go check out the trailer and see the game in action. There is actual gameplay in there. So Saul, did you watch the trailer? What's up?
I did. I thought it looked so mediocre and cliche that I actually put that as the thumbnail, and I put Anthem 2 in our thumbnail text, and people are going to think that that's Anthem 2.0. It
you
looks
think so?
That cliche, yes.
I will say this.
There's nothing about it that looked interesting to me. Like, it just looks like your run-of-the-mill co-op horde, first-person shooter, third-person shooter. It's just weird. Like, it all looked samey. As a matter of fact, I almost thought that was Gears of War too. Like there's a specific shot in this trailer where the girl's walking and it's the camera's following by her side, and her armor even looks reminiscent of Gears 4.
So do you know who's making this?
Yeah, it's
do you know what games they've made?
Yeah, and I can't think of what it is now.
Okay, so they made Bulletstorm.
Yeah,
which is
who is that?
The studio is called People Can Fly.
Okay.
So with that, they of course are experienced on Unreal Engine. So a couple things going on here. It's an Unreal Engine game.
Yeah, I said it's definitely Unreal Engine. You could tell that from the way the game looks.
Yeah, it being cross-gen, I think is probably. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's good to say that because it means that people know that they'll be able to get to play it. But of course, it doesn't necessarily look super next gen in value. Though I will say this, I think the game looks a lot like, to me, the problem I have with Gears of War that I mentioned in this recently. I actually think the game looks all right, mildly fun. It just doesn't look like anything.
It just looks like
that the problem I have with it is essentially, like I said, Gears of War just kind of feels bland. When I played Gears of War 5, it's like, yeah, it's a long established thing, but it has almost no style of its own. It just looks like a bunch of other games.
Also, it's ironic because the IGN game Outriders trailer is like gameplay, and there's like maybe less than a second of gameplay in that actual trailer.
Mm-hmm.
This one, let me see if I can find the shot so I can actually give people a time frame. But it's literally like, it just, to me, it looks so samey. Yeah, I've actually been the guy that I was walking next to, not the woman. But nope, that's not what I was thinking of. But yeah, it looks like a combination of like so many cliche games right there. It is at let me see if I can pause it at that right time. Right, it's just a split second of when it happens, but it looks like Gears of War. That even looks like Gears of War at 204. But right there, tell me at 205, that does not look just like Gears of War. Exact carbon copy right there. And it's the guy with the beard. And I'm not saying the game's gonna be bad. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm not trying to hate on the game, but I'm just telling you what I feel about it. It just looks, and that guy right there looks like a Resistance enemy ripoff. Look at that. Does that not look like the Resistance guys with the big old things on their back? Yeah, it does, kind of.
If it looks a little more alien, I'd agree with you. But it's still, I mean, it actually kind of makes me think of a Mad Max character. But
maybe
look,
so,
either way,
humanoid
here's the thing on this. I hope the game is good.
But
there's something that's more interesting about this to me. The bigger thing I want to see is how the story plays out in this, because there are games that don't have very interesting art style or looking, but they actually end up being a really fun game. And a good example of that is a game that by all means is underwhelming looking when you go to look at it, and that was the Remnant from the Ashes. But it was also a AA game.
I would argue, though, two things. One, it is a AA game. Two, it is borderline games as a service, where this game claims it's not.
That's true. They've constantly added stuff.
Yeah.
And it exists in a way that's a little different. It hinged on the fact of, hey, what if we made a kind of Dark Souls style game, but as a shooter and game?
Remnant has its own cool style to it. This, to me, doesn't feel like this has personality at all. And that's
from a AAA perspective, I think that Remnant does have a style, but it's kind of muddied up by the fact that it didn't have a lot of budget. Yeah. Reasonably. I mean, it's okay. I still enjoy the game. And it exists in that window of games that don't look phenomenal, but are actually really fun. It doesn't really matter what they look like, or if it looks like it's something that you can't necessarily tell if you'd enjoy it from a trailer enough. And I feel the same way about this.
Yeah.
But the bigger thing that I kind of noticed from this is, do you notice that most of the next-gen games that we've seen stuff from, definitely actual gameplay of some sort, or something that's supposed to be representative of actual gameplay, have almost all been these co-op looter shooters doing all these things with classes. Godfall, a lot like this.
I almost said Greedfall. Yeah, Godfall looks, but
Godfall looks more stylistic.
Yeah, I'll say Godfall looks so much more unique than this game does. Mm-hmm. But the thing about it is, and this is kind of what I'm worried about, they are choosing really easy to optimize game types to show us early.
I know, and it's
we
really
haven't
weird.
gotten a single AAA style story that can really show off what we may see.
Well, that we've actually seen, because like you can bring up,
they haven't showed us that yet.
you can bring up Hellblade 2, but all we saw was a pre-rendered cutscene.
Yeah, now
that doesn't really, it's not indicative of anything.
They said it's all supposed to be in engine, so it's kind of weird with that. Like pre-rendered can be misconstrued in a lot of ways. It could be real, it couldn't be real. It's in engine, which also could be misconstrued in a million ways.
Well, in engine means that it was made in the engine, but that doesn't mean it wasn't pre-rendered from that engine.
Yeah,
and that becomes the thing. It's like, well, what can you do in real time versus what you can do in rendering?
Yeah, everything we've seen though has been like, I guess Halo 6 technically is shown, but
Halo Infinite, and that's a similar thing. It's focusing on a lot of multiplayer.
But that's not
stuff.
But remember though, that's not an Xbox Series X game.
Oh, it's not.
So,
well, it is, and that's the only way they've shown it, but it's also going to be on the other consoles. That's the best way to kind of word it.
Yeah.
It's like they're showing it as a Series X game, but
we
they're
haven't
not
gotten
actually
a definitive exclusive, new gen exclusive reveal yet.
Godfall is next gen.
Well, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about not in the sake of what the
so
of a
first
different
party
genre
exclusive
of what we,
or exclusive or what?
No, and the difference of genre of what we've seen.
Yes,
third person quick shooters. Like we haven't not seen anything that's capable of showing it off, which is kind of scary because I'm sure you read that article that our partner website, Final Weapon X, put out. But many other websites have been reporting on it this week too. And I read it on Final Weapon, and I read it again through Reddit on GameSpot. But that some of the stuff for the PS5 is costly to them, and we're going to get into that later. But also, coronavirus may be stopping and delaying production on a lot of this.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
So we'll get into that here in a little bit, though, because I'm actually going to go pee real quick.
Oh, okay.
I'm too scared to hold it in after like 3 weeks ago.
Oh, man, trust me. As somebody who's had kidney stones and my kidney's actually been hurting randomly throughout this, I'm going through some other stuff. I'm constantly scared. And I'm drinking tea, which is even a worse thing. Drinking a diuretic when you're needing to sit down and record something that's going to make you go pee. Who knows? Yeah, it is what it is. Hope everybody's doing well, though. Pure Leaf, if you would like to sponsor us, I would gladly take it. Anyway, while Saul's out, I mean, my big thing on this is it's interesting to me the kind of genres that are showing as the primary. It's almost like they had to go through and say that this is not a games as a service, because otherwise that's how it would be construed, because it looks like a lot of the stuff we're seeing going into next gen, at least the first things that people are willing to put out there, are things that could be easily looked at like, okay, games as a service, something that people will be able to play over a long time. We saw some of that this gen with, like, of course, Warframe was a really early game. There's been plenty of games that were really early releases that have stuck around that are more or less that style, the games as a service style, which I think MMO kind of folds into as well. Destiny, of course, is still going in a way. It's not the original title, but it's still Destiny. So, yeah, I think there's something to that. It's just, I don't know if it's more indicative of what the industry thinks is a really good move right now, or just what's indicative of what people are, what's far enough along that people are willing to show, because it's a simpler thing to show. And I don't necessarily mean that to the downside of any of these things. I hope all these games are good, but we'll see. It's kind of hard to tell. But while Saul is in the bathroom, we'll go ahead and start talking about the next thing, which ironically actually is about Warframe. So Warframe fans can go check out, this is something that Saul didn't really have to worry about. It's just TennoCon is going on this year again. It's the annual show for Digital Extremes, the developer behind Warframe. It's going to take place on July 11th, so you guys can go, and if you have any interest in that, you can either just stream and watch it as it's going on, as they do their showcase, which shows their plans for what they intend to add to Warframe or change, or you can actually go and see these things yourselves and actually get your hands-on experience with some of the upcoming changes, as well as just interact with other people in the community. So yeah, that's if you enjoy Warframe. It's a game I constantly talk about getting back into, and I just have not had the time to do so. As someone who's been trying to, busy with so many other things and talking about starting to play Red Dead Online, I played it once, haven't played it again. So it's hard for me to apparently commit to things like that. Maybe that's why these types of games are so hard for me to jump back into. But that is okay. I hope Saul is okay. He's been gone for longer than I would have anticipated, but that is what it is. Let's see. Is there anything else on here I can throw out? Annual Dice Awards happened this past week. So Untitled Goose Game, of course, got Game of the Year. But you can go check out all the other different awards and the other games that were recognized with those awards if you want to go check them out. They're out there. Saul, before I get too moved on, did you want to add anything into the going back to that Outriders thing of the last thing I kind of phrased it on is the Outriders and Godfall and like Halo and all these things that we're seeing, is this indicative of where the industry is and what they think is the most successful, coming off of things like Fortnite and whatnot? And what I brought up is for Outriders to actually go out of their way to specify that they're not a games as a service, it's almost like they knew they had to do that, because without that little tidbit, people would immediately think they were a games as a service. But is that indicative of the industry where we're at right now, or just indicative of what's far enough along that people are willing to show?
I don't think it's indicative of that. I think it is indicative of the fact that people know that the jump between this console gen and next console gen is going to be kind of slight in terms of fidelity of graphics and visuals and stuff. And I think that they're just trying to show us some of the early stuff in the works that we all know is going to be cross-gen, so our hopes don't get super high on what we may get, because it may be downgraded in the future. Or it just might not be what people have in mind for those that aren't expecting something more realistic in a way. And I say that not meaning like not trying to sound pretentious or anything, but I do think that what we're going to see, like what we saw with Hellblade, for an example, the game looked fantastic, but we don't know if that's how the game's really going to look or not. And once again, it is all an engine, but there's tricky words there. I don't know if people are ready to show those kinds of games yet. That's not the easy to make or easy to capitalize games that say, okay, Godfall. Godfall looks fantastic, but it also looks a little clunky. Have you watched the gameplay of that?
Yeah.
It looks a little clunky, but it looks great. But also, it doesn't look like what I know people are envisioning as a next-gen game.
I think the bigger reason for me, before I answer even say anything, the reason I guess would say is, if you think that people aren't ready to show that, why? Is it the games aren't far enough along, or is it that they're not at the stage?
The tech is not far enough along.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you on that one.
You think so?
So what I get at is, I think part of what's going on here is a lot of these games are going to be cross-gen. Godfall not, but it's also an exclusive from a small new developer.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of why that gets a little bit of a different look. Though it is still one of the first next-gen only, not even cross-gen. I think that's part of why it's exclusively next-gen.
Right.
Is Sony trying to have something that's, hey, here's something you can only do on PS5, and here's what you see.
Yeah, and so far we're 1 for 1 with that. Xbox showed Hellblade, we got that. Which Hellblade's still not indicative of weirdly Microsoft being not competitive.
But where I think it is, I don't think it's that the tech's not far enough along. I think what it is that these things are things that you can easily show that, for the most part, besides Godfall, which, Godfall was like Sony's little ace in the hole for the Game Awards, and then they probably did not realize that Microsoft was going to show the whole console, and that was supposed to be their ace in the hole.
Yeah, so
there's probably an expectation that, hey, each manufacturer is going to have one big announcement. At least during the Game Awards, and I think Sony just didn't realize which one it was going to, probably, who knows, they may have had some little bit of information that said that they might be doing that. But I think that's why we saw that, and because we managed to see a couple of other things that were aimed at next gen from Microsoft, like we saw Hellblade, of course, during the Game Awards, but then we also saw back in E3, we saw Microsoft show off Halo Infinite, which was supposed to be running on One X. So I think it was just in an attempt to try and catch up a little bit and be like, well, hey, here's at least one game. But what I actually think it is on both sides, to at least some extent, but more so on Sony's side, as to why we've yet to see as many things, and maybe from other third-party publishers, but definitely from the Sony realm, is that they want to show those things alongside a bigger dump of information. I think what it comes down to is that they don't want to show it just as an individual game and say, hey, just so you know, this is a PS5 game. I think they want to do the inverse. I think they want to show you a little bit more about PS5, tell you a little bit more about PS5, and then go, by the way, what we just talked about, this is what they can do, and not the inverse. Even though I think the inverse may still work, I just think Sony's never done the opposite. Right,
and I'm talking merely from third parties.
Yeah,
too.
Whereas I think the reason that third parties are a little slower, I think Square's looking at this may be a AAA game, but it's from a smaller studio, and this is something they can look at and go, hey, you know what? I applaud them for the attempt at what this is. Definitely from a studio, from a publisher like Square Enix. This is getting back to seeing Square Enix do more specifically from their non-Japanese side in a very different way. We've seen Tomb Raider keep going, but almost everything else has been different. So it's been more Japanese focused and varied, but this is still something.
But it's weird we're seeing the same types of games in a way.
Yeah.
And
but
for
third parties, I think a lot of it comes down to so many of them do yearly titles that it's like, we know, okay, like Ubisoft can't show much right now because all their games got delayed because they were running into the problem of all their games being too similar for people. So what do they have to do? They have to go back and be like, we got to change some things. We got to be a little bit more broad strokes with these things. And we have to make sure these games are the best they can be. So we know what's coming up from Ubisoft. We know that we're getting Gods and Monsters or whatever that game is. It's from the Odyssey team. We know we're getting a new Watch Dogs. And we know we're getting, what was that last game? It goes to show you, I don't pay as much attention, so I don't worry about it. But then EA, we know that EA, we're going to get our normal things. We're going to get whatever yearly releases they have, sports games and whatnot. Yeah. And then Activision, as far as they're concerned, they know that we're going to get a Call of Duty game. So when you look at that, I think it's just that why show all these things for next gen when the bigger market you're going to have is the current gen?
Yeah, but also at the same time, if that's the case, we still haven't seen Elden Ring. And we don't know at this point. I would assume that is a current gen game. We don't know now. It's going so long that unless we get something in the next couple of months, I could see that being a summer release.
Who's the publisher?
Bandai Namco, shouldn't it be?
Well, just because it's from doesn't mean that. Obviously,
well, that's who
Activision
I'm guessing.
Did.
Activision did Sekiro, but I thought I remember it being Bandai Namco.
I think it is. I do think you're right. I am curious. I want to go double check that.
But
Bandai Namco.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, it's weird that we're not seeing this kind of these kind of first gen games, and I think that it's done by design. I think of it this way: what was one of the first PS4 games we saw that was a second party game?
That was a third party
or second party
game.
Bound by Flame. Look at how that game looked at launch. It did not.
What do you mean by C? Like released?
No. I'm talking about
teased?
out of all of the first third-party games for PS4, when after the PS4 was announced, what did we start seeing? We saw a couple more knack trailers that were variations. We saw a couple Call of Duty trailers of Call of Duty Ghosts. Mm-hmm. But then what was the one single player game we saw was Bound by Flame. That was one.
I remember it, but I don't remember it being that big of a.
It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was one of the first, is what I'm saying.
Well, hold on. Now you got me curious. I wonder when the reveal trailer came out.
I want to say it was in
14. The system was already out by then.
The reveal trailer for that game came out by then?
Yeah, the reveal trailer was February 13th, 2014. The system had already been out for 3 months.
3 months technically.
So, and don't get me wrong, I'm not. It's hard to remember that.
I remember Bound by Flame though being one of the first ones that we saw for some reason. Maybe I'm getting it mixed up with something else, but I remember seeing maybe.
Well, you also didn't get a PS4 at launch, so you're a little more.
Yeah, but skewed. I got an Xbox at launch or in launch window.
Yeah.
So I was attentive of what was coming out.
I don't know.
No, actually, I did not get an Xbox at launch window.
You didn't get either of them at launch.
No, I got an Xbox One after I got it. Yeah, after I got the PS4. Because at that point, when I had the PS4, all I had was my PS3.
Either way, we'll see what that ends up being. I don't really. It's hard to tell what the goal is for this in particular. I think it's trying to be a hold your cards close to your chest kind of thing.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that it is a show these games that are not low effort to make or anything like that, but that they are not going to be on par with what we will see from the first party developers and even second party developers.
I think on the third party side, it's going to be more of we have to look and see if they're as hesitant to move their games to be exclusively next gen, like they did. So like early this gen, it was more of like a thing of like when they were making games before the system came out, it was like worst case scenario, we're making them cross gen. I want to see how quickly it takes for third-party publishers to go exclusively next gen.
Not Bound by Flame, Thief was what I was thinking of.
Yes, okay, Thief was one of the first games.
Yeah, I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, wait a second, Bound by Flame was not,
and it was a cross-gen title.
Was Bound by Flame cross-gen?
I think
that game was so bad that like I didn't pay any attention to it. I watched Seth play it, and I was like, no, I'm not. No.
Yeah, but no, Thief was, and it was a cross-gen game.
That's what I remember.
We did see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just one of those cases of like, hey, they're going to show us these games. You're not going to get the graphic fidelity you think you're going to get going into next gen with these game reveals. And they're playing it safe because of that. Because think about it. Think at launch, what cross-gen games looked next gen this past gen. None of them.
Yeah, the only games that look next gen were exclusives.
Yeah, and they were first party exclusives for the most part. Yeah. So it's just one of those things of like they are keeping the cards close to their chest, and they're doing it with these games that are, I don't want to say easy to manufacture, but they're or even low effort, because that still sounds pretentious, but they are just like shooter, like third person shooter games with probably, the visuals are cliche, but yet they're kind of original. Like, and I'm not trying to put the game down. I don't know how the game plays. It may play amazingly. It may be a great game to pick up, but it's nothing new.
Or at least from what we've seen, it's hard to tell.
What's nothing new even compared to this gen? Like, you can go find a game that looks like that on Steam or on Xbox or on, like, right then, like I said, I compared it to like 2 or 3 different games in one go, because it does have hints of like what looks to be like God of War, kind of some Resistance stuff thrown in there with the guy's back armor, kind of some stuff with Anthem. It's nothing, you brought up Ashes. I think Ashes looks unique for what
Remnant,
it is.
But yeah.
Or Remnant from the Ashes, yeah.
Yep.
But it looks unique for what it is. That game did not look unique to me.
Fair enough. So here's an interesting one. Despite opting out of E3 again this year and the seemingly hiatus nature of PSX, PlayStation will be active at least at one fan event this year with the announcement of their booth at PAX East. The event kicks off at 10 a.m. EST on February 27th, and the attendees will be able to play Final Fantasy VII Remake, The Last of Us Part 2, the recently released streams, as well as other upcoming titles like Neo 2 or Iron Man VR, and a bunch of other games as well. I'm at least glad to see them doing this, because I don't know if you remember earlier in the year when they said that they weren't doing E3, and it was kind of like, well, what are they going to do? I remember saying, like, their thing needs to be, regardless of if it's PSX or not, I have a feeling that they're going to go and start being more active at fan conventions. And it looks like I was right. It doesn't mean that this is going to happen more often. It'd be cool to see if they're going to be at every single PAX.
Because there's 3 PAX a year, I think, or 4?
I'm trying, because there's PAX East and PAX West, and then I think there's PAX South. I don't know if there's a PAX North.
There's not a PAX North, I don't think.
So there's 3,
Which
I guess.
Weird.
But with that,
is there even a PAX South?
Yeah, it's South? In Texas.
Okay, that's the one. Okay, yeah.
So my thing about this, that's hard to completely tell how this is going to be. I said it a long time ago. And we were talking about it on Twitter recently with the likes of Gideon and Ryan, or at least I was in particular, about PSX and E3 and all these different things. And people were lamenting the loss of Sony at PSX, but of course now we're seeing even more things like Jeff Keighley is not going to be at the lack of Sony at E3, and now we know that Jeff Keighley will not be at E3, and there's some people saying that Nintendo won't be at E3, but they'll still have a Direct. There's all sorts of stuff going on, but it's kind of been this lamenting the death of E3 thing. Now, my thing for a long time, and even when Sean first came out and said, E3 is less of a viable venue for us than it once was. There used to be a time and a place for it, but it's lesser and lesser. And my thought at the time was, after going to 2 PSXs, when he had said that, I loved it, because I was like, okay, this is what you do. You don't need E3, even though E3 is ironically turning into a fan event. Mm-hmm. I was like, you don't need E3. You need to do these really personable fan events where you get your people together, and even going to something like PAX and like letting people get hands-on with your games and showing these things. I think that this is a much better show. There's something about the level of community that it introduces that I think is a better sell for moving yourself forward. They happen more often to where you can be more engaged with your fans at probably a little bit lesser of a cost and with a lesser expectation, because when you're going to these fan events, there's not an expectation that at every PAX you're going to have some monster bombshell reveal. Yeah. So it kind of helps them, and it lets them control the speed at which they do those things, which is one of the things they seem keen on doing. E3 puts an unnecessary pressure on showing something, which can be incredibly fun for the people watching, but it can also be incredibly daunting, like we always talk about, when you have to show something because people expect you to. And then you go, but we can't put this game out for another 3 years. So that's where I'm at on it.
I will say that I think that Jeff is only dropping out for his own game.
Oh, because he realizes that he can do even more with the Game Awards.
Well, I think that he thinks that Sony dropping out can be a potential cascading effect. So that if he's like, I'll drop out too, then he'll think, okay, well, now this event's not going to be as big as the Game Awards if more people drop out. So maybe he's hoping it's a cascading effect, so Game Awards becomes a more bigger event.
Who knows?
But that's the thing. And I love E3. Like, I'm one of the ones in the boat. Like, it sucks that they're skipping out on E3. Jeff Keighley, not so much, because he didn't really do a whole lot besides host a couple of things. Yeah. But like when venues start dropping out, it becomes
or manufacturers or publishers.
Yeah, even then, it's just lame. Like, because it's not always about selling, because people don't understand, or maybe they don't realize that E3 was not a consumer event really up until like the past 5 years.
Well, no, past 2 years.
Yeah, because it was press only for the longest time,
with a couple of extra passes that people would do giveaways for, but it wasn't something that was meant to be open to the normal public.
Yes, and I think it's more fun to watch just for the news and the game reveals we get, and that's slowly what the Game Awards is becoming. Now, if they can get off that weird German time or whatever they're on and host it at a reasonable time.
They got to shorten it. They actually started at a reasonable time this year and just went way too long with a bunch of stuff that felt unnecessary.
That's what made me mad about the Oscars. The Oscars was like 4.5 hours long for whatever reason. They were supposed to be on like a 3 hour time limit, I thought.
I don't know.
I swear it started at 7 and it ended at like 11:30.
I should say this. Okay, so like other fan events, and maybe the Game Awards will get to where they actually do this, and it'd be really cool. Because to me, it's so weird how many Game Awards they give off screen. Or they don't even do anything about it. They're like, hey, while we were at commercial break, we gave away these 4 awards. It's like, why? This thing is called the Game Awards, and you're giving all the awards out separately.
That's the dumb thing, too, is that like E3 wasn't ran by commercials.
Yeah. Now, the big thing about that comes down to most other fan events, you get to this benefit of like it's across multiple days, which is one of the biggest strengths I think E3 has. Instead of trying to cram a bunch of reveals into a 3 hour window with a bunch of commercials that also have to happen, instead you get to go through this aspect of like, okay, well, here's Sony's little 3 hour of stuff they want to show, or anywhere from 1 to 3 hours of stuff they want to show. Here's Microsoft's, and they're all broken up by a decent amount of time, and it's over 2 to 3 days, if not a whole week, like it normally has been. So. It's like the PAX has that too. PAX happens over a weekend. Like, you get a couple of days where you can go have people go in for 2 or 3 days, go in and try these things out. And I do think that that's a lot better than this 1 day thing. Like even PSX, when it was going, was a 2-day event. It was always about, hey, get time on the floor, play these games, do these things. And I do think that maybe you would feel differently if you'd gone to one, which also is going to maybe speak more to your point in a weird way. My point is, I think if you'd gone to one of these more fan-focused events and been like, oh, you're getting to put your hands on everything, you'd understand how much more special it feels and how much more you actually care about the things you're learning about.
I think that in itself is a problem.
But the flip side of that, going towards your point, what I was going to say is the majority of the population will have not gone to a fan event.
Exactly, yeah.
So you need to find the way to bridge that.
E3 was a fantastic way of doing exactly that, bridging that. It's something I didn't have to go to, yet it had excitement built within from the reveals. So it's one of those things that, like, I don't think Sony should be looked at as a hero for skipping E3.
I'm not looking at him as a hero, but
I know. Some people do, though. I just think that, it's perfectly fine to be at E3.
I think it's a weird thing to look at him as a hero as. I mean,
guess unless people were fighting, like they're like, anybody who had negative annotation on Twitter about that, people were like, no, you're an idiot, it cost them so much more money to do this and this and this. I'm like, well, it's meant to do that. It's almost it's literally a press event.
To me, I think it's moving the money, right? If you're not going to do E3 and you have reasons that you view as valid enough, then where are you reinvesting that money that gets you in connection with the fans?
As I've learned,
that's the thing.
Well, as I've learned with most major companies, you won't know. You won't ever see it.
Of course you won't know.
Because people thought last year, oh, well, Sony's not going to E3, surely they'll be PSX. No.
Nope.
So,
and I think that was a really bad move.
Oh, yeah.
But there's nothing I can do to change that. That's something we're going to have to wait and see if it ever comes back around. Now that Sean's gone, it really makes me wonder if we're ever going to see it again.
He was one of the headers for PSX, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think it would be a really... I think that something like PSX, it needs to be something that people are pushing for that have higher up power. It's easy for a company to be like, well, people are buying our products anyway. Why do we need to go out and have this fan event? Well, that's the exact reason. These are the fans that bought all your stuff and are giving you all the success and money that you're seeing because of this as a result of the success. I don't think that it's crazy to say, hey, you know what? What if we had a PlayStation strictly focused event that we spearheaded and helmed and let people come into and experience? I think it'd be really smart. And actually, here's my crazy thing, and to an extent we've seen it, if I'm not mistaken, in the XO event, kind of like that.
What is
like,
the XO event?
XO 19, which was Xbox's thing, a global celebration of all things Xbox. Watch the special Inside Xbox episode on demand and see everything we announced from XO 19 in London. So I think XO 19 is closer to Xbox's answer to what PSX was, but my real thought after PSX came out, and definitely after I went to my first one, was, oh my God, everyone should be doing this.
Yeah.
Nintendo should have a Nintendo experience, or whatever they'd want to call it. Xbox should have a fan-focused event that is a couple of days that lets people who really love that brand go out and experience a bunch of different things. And it brings back so much of the stuff that E3 had started to shell off. It brings back the appreciation for indies. There's indie booths that you can go around and see. And E3 is trying, I think, to pick up on that. And maybe it's too late with people dropping out. E3's move towards being consumer friendly, I think, are open to the public, I think was probably in an effort to try and capitalize on that, let people come. There's something that's so much more kinetic and like it really pulls on you to see a game announced at a show and then immediately go, hey, you know, they just showed Godfall during this thing. Now I can go play a really rough version of Godfall. And it kind of gives you more appreciation where you're like, okay, I really see where it's at. And you can talk to the devs and they'll kind of give you a little bit more of an idea of what's going on and why they're doing things. It just has a much more structured and a much more, I shouldn't even say structured, a much more homely, natural feel of like people going around who just love a hobby and getting to experience it and talk to the people who are responsible for that hobby existing in the first place.
Yeah. And it seems like less and less we're seeing people or companies give back, which is why
thankfully PAX exists.
Yeah.
It's a completely separate entity, but you know, either way. So a couple other things. This I really loved because it's very seldom that we get we hear on the internet a lot the view of the people who are the consumer base, but a lot of the times we choose to not see, or the developers choose to not give their thoughts, and we don't choose to take those thoughts into a perspective with us. But in an interesting view from the creator and developer behind Journey to the Savage Planet, he gives perspective from the developer side of recent move towards backwards and forwards compatibility, stating, quote, Sony and Microsoft seem to be thinking about releasing more updated hardware more often, like phones, and so they need to make sure the software can stick around, or they'll do terrible things to the developers. But really, it just means we need to do more work supporting more platforms, which removes one of the best things about consoles, a reliable box with a long shelf life, end quote. And it's interesting that this goes back towards something I bring up a lot, that while I like to see the improved technology of like the Pro and the 1X, all it does is take away more and more and more and more from the whole point of a console, which is one individual box that you can endlessly optimize towards and really push to its limits, but always it's a known quantity. And I thought it was interesting to bring that up because, you know, I think he's right. There is a thought process to, well, if we iterate and make the PS4 Pro, but let's say that here we are. We released PS4, it's 2013, right? We're planning to release an updated console in 2016 or 15. And do we make it a PS4 that's improved, or do we technically make it to PS5? And you have to go through and look, and they go, well, we can't make it to PS5 because if we make it to PS5 and these games don't work on there, then we risk the software not sticking around long enough. We don't make enough money. We make it harder on developers. Developers don't see a return of investment. Publishers don't see a return of investment. So we're going to make it to PS4 Pro, which is going to make it to where you can play all these PS4 games on it, and PS4 games can tap into that and do even more on it. But developers will still be able to tap into the original user base while still developing for what's essentially one system. But it's not.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy too, and I hate to say this because it's going to sound really negative and mean, but it always seems like the people who are they're the same people who do not want mid-gen refreshes because they'll say they don't want to spend the extra money 3 years later, but they're also the same people that want 10-year console lives. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, what you just said doesn't make sense to me, but maybe I misheard it. You
everybody I've seen or talked to who are against mid-gen refreshes in the most extreme way, like they're not that they're impartial to it or anything like that, but they say that they should not exist. Also say that the consoles that they buy on day one should last them 8 to 10 years, and I don't get that. I don't get like how you want a single piece of hardware to last you that long with there not being any upgrades to the technology you're using. Like that's that to me, for whatever reason, that does not make sense. We don't treat any other piece of technology in our life like that. Ever. A phone, a computer, you don't keep the same. It's very rare somebody keeps the same computer for 10 years. But you don't, it's even more rare to see somebody keep the same smartphone for 10 years. It fits into that weird kind of thing of, in order for technology to advance, then we can't let developers hold them back by just not having hardware release or even upgrades. And I think that technically with the way things work is that the pros could be called 5s. That could have been the PS5. That could have it would have been stupid, but it could have been.
Oh, it could have been.
Yeah, but I'm not saying it should have been, but it could have been. And I wouldn't have agreed with it. But then again, we could have gotten, because when you think about it, that would have been 4.5 years ago that thing came out. Then we turn around, or was it 4.5 years or was it 3.5?
I think that both PSVR and PS4 Pro came out in 2016.
Okay, so a little over 3 years old at this point.
November 2016.
Yeah, so a little over 3 years old at this point. So now we would have gotten the PS6 coming November. They could have done it that way. I wouldn't have agreed with it. I would have thought that would have been dumb because the incremental update we would have gotten would have been worth a PS5 name for the Pro. If that thing came out and was called the PS5, I would have not agreed. But I had expectations going into it thinking, okay, this is going to run games a little bit better. It's going to have a boost mode and it's going to have bigger storage. That makes sense for next gen. But I was talking to somebody, and I don't remember who it was.
Wait, for next gen or just an update? I guess I'm getting a little lost in what you're saying. It sounds like in one breath you're saying that the PS4 should have been called the PS4 Pro because it wasn't enough, but then it sounds like in the next sentence it was enough for. I think I'm misunderstanding you.
Yeah. So what I'm saying at the very beginning is that I find it weird that everybody I've ever met or talked to in real life that do not want mid-gen refreshes are the same people who want their consoles to last them 10 years. They think that with a console they should have to spend $500 every 5 years, that it should last them, and it does. It just, they may not perform as well as the updates do. So that was my point to that one. The second point was that Sony could have called the PS4 Pro the PS5. It just would have been dumb to do so. Because
and why do you think that?
For what I just said, you just with the upgrade to the Pro, I think that is, especially for day one, is for the hardcore users. They want the few games that run more stable on it. They want the higher storage without having to tinker with it with themselves. They want 4K output. They want all this stuff. But I don't think that the tech itself was right in its time to be called the PS5.
Okay,
but
so
Sony could have.
Not as much of a jump as you'd typically want from a next gen move.
Yes,
or a
which is
full
why.
next gen
Yeah,
update.
which is why that I think that every console gen going forward is going to have mid gen updates, and if they don't, they're going to have very short gens.
Okay, so you kind of dealt with one of the things, because going back to the very first thing, I don't think there's anything wrong with them, and I'm not saying you thought that either.
No, I'm just saying
there's definitely nothing wrong with the idea for anybody out there who wants their consoles to last 10 years. Actually, Sony's thing used to be, and I'm sure this is probably true of other manufacturers, I don't know for exactly, but one of the things that Sony used to always talk about is, here's the PS2, here's the PS1. We want the PS1 to last 10 years. And that doesn't mean that we don't want to iterate on it and make another version of it until 10 years. But the idea is to have a system that can come out, sell for roughly 8 to 10 years, and have some form of support from some developers and publishers for 10 years. That was kind of their goal. That was always their plan. They did it with the PS1, they did it with the PS2, and each one of them did it. The PS1, I think one of the last games that came out was in 2004. The PS2, which came out originally in 2000, its last game was like FIFA 11 or something like that. FIFA 14. It was something crazy. It was the last game for the PS2 came out after the PS4 had released. Just keep that in mind. So clearly, 10-year lifespan. Now, maybe not those last few years where there's just a wealth of games. No, but they were still there. Your console still worked and supported in some degree. And I think that's what some people are looking at. So I guess what's probably happening, I've never heard those people are not enough for it to
we
be in my memory.
We know one of those people, and I'll tell you who it is off camera.
Okay.
Because I've conversated with him before about it, and I've told him, I'm like, you can't expect companies to not revise products just because you don't want them to.
Yeah, I think my view on that, to kind of be in the in between, like of understanding what they're going for, but also looking at the other thing, is I think the fear is that the introducing of a mid-gen refresh and the idea of that into the console space, which has never really been done until this generation, realistically. And we even saw Nintendo start to do it with the 3DS while we saw these other things going on. But with that, the idea, I think, comes from I think it scares them into thinking that the more quickly that they iterate on things, the more quickly there'll be a need to completely get rid of these things. And the fear would be that,
which is almost never the case.
Even quicker, they'd lose the ability to have people still wanting to make games for the original base PS4 10 years out. I think that's probably the fear. Now, clearly, here's the thing. The Vita came out in 2012, and the Vita is still getting new releases today. Now, not just in an abundance, but we're 8 years now. We are at 8 years, and actually, I think it came out. Now that I'm really thinking about it, I want to say it was February of 2012, but I want to double check that.
Dang, was it?
Yeah, it was December 2011 for Japan and February 22nd everywhere else. So yeah, and I got February 17th. I'm trying to remember. I got the week early edition because it was one that you could pre-order. But still, my point being, 8 years down the line, here we are still getting games for it. And that's great. And that's a system that has otherwise been killed by Sony, but we're still getting that support. So I think that the fear, I understand how you get to that point, but I think Sony, even in their thing, has shown that even if they don't support it, their consoles and their tech gets out there and still gets supported. Where there is a will, there is a way, and there's always a group of people who really love hardware. You see that with things like GameCube and people who are still making brand new Sega Genesis games and crazy stuff like that. It's just going to be, it happens, you know? It's rare. But yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. My big thing is I could really understand how these things get harder. I think that there's a lot of developers that really like the idea of never having to develop games for PC because it's so much more daunting to deal with from a optimization side. There is something that has to be infinitely attractive to a developer to go, hey, here's one box, and this box is just this set of hardware, and if you make it for this set of hardware, it's going to work across all those systems. And there's something that's really great about that. I know for me, that sounds like if I was going to be making games, that sounds great. Mm-hmm. That sounds like, oh, there's a lot less chance for error on my side, a lot less chance that people are going to buy my game and not be able to play it because of a mistake that we made. And definitely, man, could you imagine how lucrative and great the idea of a console must have been back when computers did not have when you couldn't patch games? Like, a console used to be great because it's like, well, if you release a game on computer and it turns out that it just really doesn't work with a couple of different chipsets, it doesn't matter. Those people that bought the game now have something that's basically worthless because you can't really patch the game.
Yeah.
So now, you have the ability to patch, but it just means that the fear for the developer comes from more work post-release.
So this brings into the conversation, which is where it goes full loop-de-loop. How much would you pay for a PS5 now that it's been so long?
So long since...
Farewell to you, my friend.
But so long since what?
The launch of the PS4.
Okay, original PS4. Yeah, for me, and this is going to be interesting for you as well, because you have at least got one PS4 for yourself and one PS4 Pro for yourself.
What?
You bought a PS4 and you had that until you bought the PS4 Pro. So you were technically... Yeah, but it wasn't for you specifically.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. For you bought two that were aimed at you. The other one was technically for another person. Whereas me, for myself, I am technically like, what, five PlayStations in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be a little different, but both of us are at least more than one console in. So we're at least double the price of admission to an extent into this.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at that, for me, I have no qualms whatsoever. And my analogy, and I think a lot of people's too, but it's obviously a clear analogy in this day and age where people exist, and there is some great counter arguments as to why. But people look at it from the point of what other tech can you buy? Going back to what Saul was actually just talking about, what other tech can you buy that you don't replace on average every 2 to 3 years, 5 years max? Right? Mm-hmm. What other tech do you buy that does that? Very, very little.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of literally is a TV.
So,
and that's just me. There are people who actually do that. Who
Yeah.
every 2 years a new TV panel comes out, they'll get that panel.
yes, exactly. There are definitely people that do that.
Yeah.
There's and across the board. And there's people that hold on to things forever.
Yeah.
I guarantee you there are people that were so bummed that they were not going to be able to use normal cables on the PlayStation 4 because it launched with HDMI only. And they thought, now I can't use my CRT.
My RVC cables. Wait, is it RVC cables?
RCA?
RCA cables. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But either way, for me, I look at it from this standpoint. I replace my phone on average every 2 to 3 years, depending on what's going on and what happens to the phone. You have to, if you break your phone, you kind of got to get another one.
Yeah.
And, for me, I really, in recent years, have gone towards this idea of what is the best performance bang for your buck. So, for example, I bought the OnePlus 6T. I really love the phone. I enjoy the phone. Cost $529, and they cost roughly $280 to manufacture. Now there's some other costs involved in there, like shipping and whatnot, but for the most part, you're looking at it costs the company $280, and then they're selling it to you for this markup. All right, so that's a pretty modest markup, right? $300 in that ballpark, depending on where you're at. Then you look at people like Samsung, who also make a phone that costs them about $300, $280 to manufacture, that sell for anywhere from $800 to $1,000, and you're looking at a much bigger markup. Then you go to the furthest extent of that, where you look at the iPhone that cost about $300 to make as well. It's in that ballpark, $250 to $300, and they sell it for anywhere from $1,100 to $1,300, depending on what you're getting. So when you go through and you start looking at all these things, to me, consoles are such a great value proposition for how long they last versus their cost of entry. So when you look at it from the standpoint of what Sony did, coming into this generation, already making a very, very slight profit of like $8, if let's just say it was $8. So the PlayStation 4 sold for $399 at launch, and it cost them essentially $391 to make, right? That's the numbers we're going to use. What a ridiculous cost proposition, because for what essentially means that they profited $8 off of, I have had the ability to keep, and technically I do, I have my 20th anniversary in there. So for $400, $500 because it was a special edition, for $500, I've had that system in there, still working perfectly, and I can play any game that releases today on it. And
you're a $40 Sony customer in a way. You have contributed exactly $40 to Sony. Technically,
yeah. I mean, if you really want to go towards that,
and I contributed 12.
So when you go towards the thought of that, what other thing gives you that much entertainment and lasts that, or I should say, because that much entertainment's weird, but what other thing lasts for that many years, constantly giving you the ability to have entertainment through it at that low of a cost of manufacturing, a cost of sale? It's very rare. So right now,
and I was thinking like PCs could technically be had for the same cost as consoles, but that's a lot of manufacturing costs to sit there and try to worry about. I'm not doing all that.
Yes, and I don't even know it, and I'm not going to deal with that.
I know if it's A&D, your manufacturing cost versus the cost of it are pretty...
Performance, is better.
Yeah.
And by nature of them coming in, they've forced NVIDIA and Intel to start doing better as well on all their stuff, thankfully. But to answer the base question, as I've very longly went around, I would be willing to max dollar myself $600.
That's my max.
My ideal price, regardless of how much it costs them to make, my ideal price $500. If they can hit that, I think that'd be really great.
So the reason we bring this up is because it got news that it cost Sony $450 to make a PS5,
roughly, with what they have planned for right now.
I think with how much revenue they made this past console generation, I think they're going to sell it for $500, and they only make $50 a console.
So I want to back that up a little bit.
Okay.
So going towards what you're talking about, the real question here that a lot of people are dealing with is they're worried that it's going to drive the cost of consoles up, because right now everybody's looking at this from the standpoint of that magic $400 price point that the PS4 was able to hit, and clearly was a good choice.
You're right.
So everybody's looking at this in the same ballpark. So the fear that everyone sees from seeing this, and the way that this is being worded by many people who are doing the articles, is that there's a worry that the console is going to be more than that sweet spot goal, that the consoles are going to be more expensive because it costs more money to make them. Mm-hmm. So, if we're looking at this, people are worried that because it costs $450 to make, Sony's not going to be willing to lose $50 per one to make the console still $400. That's a thing. The flip side of that from other people is, okay, like people like me, let's say that the console does take somewhere a little bit above $450 to manufacture. If Sony sells it for $500, I'm getting a really great piece of machine that can do a lot of things and last a long time for $50 margin. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
For me, looking at, and don't get me wrong, there's people that don't have as much disposable income, so the closer you can get to $0, the better. So if you get to 400, it's better. But I think from just looking at this effectively for me, I think $500 would be a perfectly reasonable profit margin for them if they wanted to say, hey, you know what? We don't want to put ourselves in any kind of dire straits just because of this. But just to throw this out there, this is also one of those things where even though we have this information, as long as it's accurate, and let's just say for the sake of argument here that it is, would Sony be willing to, for competition's sake, take a loss? Who knows? They could. Would they do it because Microsoft chooses to sell their, right now, again, rumored to be more powerful console? If Microsoft is willing to sell their console for $400 or $450 or $500, then there's more of a move on Sony to be like, okay, we're going to take a loss because we want to be more competitive. And they very well might do that. But for me right now, $500 is where I think it probably will end up, where it probably should be. And I don't think it's weird for Sony to want to go into the generation ensuring that they're not hurting themselves by losing per console, despite what they'll make up later. I think that this is smarter business than the original old school plan of, hey, we're going to sell the system at a $300 loss, but we're going to make that money up later. That's a very dangerous and dumb plan if you want to stay around as a business.
And you saw they did file for bankruptcy.
Yeah, so I mean, there's clearly an effect on that.
Yeah,
and they had to. That's the sad part. They had to. If they would have actually charged what the PlayStation cost them to make, definitely after all the problems they had with it, it would have been the death knell of the PlayStation brand. But here we are, since this is a new generation and they don't have to look at any of that, why not come in? And I think the same for Microsoft. I don't think Microsoft should come in, try at a loss just to try and be more competitive, but they might.
Yeah. Yeah, I see it. I get it. And I kind of hope them the best when it comes to this.
So let's flip the question. What would be the max price? Let's say that the Series X has a crazy great lineup full of the IP from Xbox that you actually love hitting day one. Let's just kind of bring it up like that. What would be the max you'd be willing to pay for the Series X?
$600 for both.
$600 is your max for both?
Yeah, I know that. What it's worth is the entertainment I'm going to get out of it, the longevity I'm going to get out of it, whether that's 3 to 5 years is what I'm going to assume, because I know there's going to be a console refresh. But I also know that I also can pinpoint what these consoles are doing in terms of tech. Like they state they could do full on ray tracing. While I'm still really iffy about that, and if it's real ray tracing or something like they do with interpolation 4K.
Just to give you a little bit of a thing there. Again, this is all rumored still. We're at that point, but from some people who have a thing, and these are reputable sources, Digital Foundry, it looks like the Xbox is going to be slightly more powerful and have better ray tracing than the PS5, but the PS5 is going to have better speeds for RAM and hard drive tech. So the SSD tech will be better. So it's like each system will have their own
kind of their
pro
own
and benefit.
Pro, yeah.
So so maybe there is something to maybe Xbox is extra powerful, extra power. The extra roughly 1.5 to 2 teraflops is going to give them the ability to really do ray tracing. And maybe PlayStation won't get real full ray tracing, but a weird form of it. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, that's all I was pretty much saying was that I think that $600 is worth it for the tech that they both have in them. Granted, there's no first day flaws, but I won't find that out because I'm going to probably buy both of them day one. So that's the thing.
Both of them day one?
Oh, yeah, both of those day one. We talked about this. I'm going to sell off my Xbox Series X, my One X, and then my PlayStation 4 Pro, trade those into GameStop, take the store credit, buy a console with all of that for one, and then take my credit card rewards and buy another one for that. So I'm only going to end up pay like $200 for both these consoles by the end, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's finish this episode with Anthem 2.0.
All right, this is a big one. So this one's going to be a good spiel to have too that we can then discuss afterwards. So after months of rumors that BioWare was working internally on revamping Anthem with Anthem 2.0 or Anthem Next, as it was both referred to, there was a Kotaku piece back in November about it. BioWare head Casey Hudson finally revealed that to be true in a blog post for the studio. While not offering an exact timeline, the blog post touched on the core complaints and core needs of the game as outlined by the devs and the community. and go on to talk about spending months, quote, just tearing it down and figuring out what it needed to change fundamentally, which they also put a lot, end quote, and that they followed that by months of rebuilding the game. One thing they stressed was that they intended to do this all properly by, quote, doing something we'd like to have done more of the first time around, giving a focused team the time to test and iterate, end quote. The current state of the game is still being supported with the shop updates, new events, and even something for the game's 1-year anniversary planned for Saturday, February 22nd. So that's the starting point. But Saul, that's my big question for you. As someone who's still yet to actually fully play Anthem, what does this mean to you?
I fully played Anthem, just not much because of how trash it was at launch.
Well, I guess what I should say is, like, you didn't beat the game. You've played less than 10% of the game's content. There's no reason for you to look at this like it's something that you fully experienced. So,
right. But it is something I fully paid $60 to play.
But it is something you fully paid for. So my question here, and I've seen this a lot from a bunch of different things when I was sharing this. One of our friends and listeners, and apparently I've closed the thing, but Mr. Tyler Haynes, if I'm remembering right, he mentioned, what do you think on this? Because he's in the same boat as me. He enjoyed the game, but he thinks it definitely could have been better.
That's the thing. The game was enjoyable. I never had a problem with the actual game itself, from a gameplay aspect and like that. For me, like, once I figured out the stupid boost mode and stuff like that was causing me frames, we had fun playing the beta. And on top of that, the world is really cool. But once again, just like Final Fantasy 15 was at launch, it was so bland. There was nothing special enough to pull me in about the world, about the characters involved, nothing. The gameplay loop was simply not good enough to keep me there. So,
like, while strong, it wasn't strong enough to support the whole game.
I mean, yeah. It wasn't
Put your
strong.
mic arm down. I don't know, over there.
Oh, how'd that happen?
I don't know.
But yeah, it wasn't strong enough in the sense to that ain't going down, but it ain't coming off. I don't know what happened there.
All right.
But yeah, it wasn't strong enough to keep me there or fully invested emotionally into the game either. But we've had these kind of comebacks before, and I'm not always mad at a game because I spent money on it. I'm mad at the game for what I wanted it to be and how it disappointed me.
But it doesn't help that you spent money.
Well, yeah, and
yeah, I get it.
Well, and that is more so of like I almost deserve something better than this for the money spent. Final Fantasy 15 and Anthem are both really good examples of how I hated Destiny after playing it at launch. I've said before multiple times, and I know you've heard me because I've talked about it. Destiny was at one point my biggest gaming disappointment ever. And it pissed me off. It comes from these are all things. They come from a studio that I love. It comes from a games developer that I know makes better games than this. And it's touted as something that it ended up not being. All three of those hit that check mark for Destiny, Final Fantasy, and Anthem. Now, it's about how the game can then become something that I'll enjoy and love. Because as much as I hated Destiny 1 and was disappointed in it, it had some of my favorite gaming moments of all time in that game. We need to see how they're going to go about it. Are these updates going to be free? Are they going to truly live up to their word and fully redo this world like they're saying they're going to do? Is this essentially going to become like what Final Fantasy 14 did? And this is something that Final Fantasy 14 did really well. When they redid the game state, they tied it into the story. Make some kind of cataclysm event in that game happen so that it really does wipe out parts of the world that they have to rebuild, and then that's Anthem 2.0. Do it something cool in game, because I kind of wish Destiny did that. But do it something like that, because if they want to become a games as a service that's going to last, first of all, you're still adding and updating content to the game, which is fine, but you're not updating enough. And that could be because you're doing the No Man's Sky approach where you're working on that update.
Yes, and I actually think, for me, that's where I think they should go. But I'll talk about all that in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of get it all out.
And that's what I really hope this game ends up doing, is becoming a new No Man's Sky, where all the updates, they come to us, because this is one of those instances where I can get where Final Fantasy 15, the DLC characters are worth the $5 and it should be $5. I will not pay for a single update for this game. I will refuse.
Yes.
I will, and I still think it's morally wrong that Final Fantasy should have technically included that into something for a discounted price. The Anthem's update should be free. Absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt. Morally and ethically should be free for all those people that paid $60 and played less than 10 hours of it and left. In order to fix this game state, that's something that I think that has to happen. As a matter of fact, they can reinvent the game, and they can say this is Anthem 2.0, a cataclysm wrecked the world, and now you got to go out as a salvaged freelancer, and you have to go out and fix it. You're going to obtain new suits as you do this, new cores to fix your suits and all that stuff. $40. Nope. $30 would be the most I'd pay for something that was an all-in-one fix if it didn't all come off like across time. But and even then, I would have to see review after review after review, and I'd still probably even wait a while.
And even if you did it, you'd still kind of have that thing in the back of your head, like, why am I having to pay
for
this?
It's still the same with Royal Edition. Like, thankfully, Royal Edition was free on Games Pass. If I like Royal Edition enough, I will buy it get on PS4 to show my support with money to say, hey, you changed your game and you at least made a version that is better than what it was. And I want those trophies. But that's pretty much my stance on Anthem. Like, I'm hoping it does come back. Do I think it will? No. Unfortunately not.
Okay, so you've actually pretty much brushed up on all the stuff I wanted to very lightly, and that's good. One of the things I really had there you go. Look at that. We bought the most sturdy monitor arms there are in this world.
You know, that came up. Oh, I guess me doing like this, lifting it up. Okay, well, now we're in the same predicament we was 10 seconds ago.
Oh, well. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's obviously clearly not hurting anything, but you know what? If you're watching this, you get to see Saul standing up and doing a bunch of extra work. But
yes,
so you brushed on most of the things that would actually be something that come up for me. And Ty as well. Ty's first question when we were talking about it was, do you think this is free or do you think this is paid? And my immediate, obvious response was, this is free. Now, the other thing you brought up that before I dig into that one is that there are 3 really great games now, I think, and 3 really great examples of games like this that can really be used to show here. So one of them, and probably one that's most similar to this game, is Destiny. Mm-hmm. So Destiny, you're completely right. We all played it at launch. And I was incredibly disappointed with it. It's weird, too, because you have the same thing. We were all playing it together, and it's like, there's fun here.
There's fun here with the experience with friends, but the world had none of it.
And then immediately, once you get done with the very, very, very little that the game had to offer, and actually, and this sounds like a controversial thing, I actually, as crazy as it sounds, Anthem was a more complete product at launch than Destiny was.
I would actually agree to that.
But I'm still going to pull that back because it doesn't necessarily matter. The point being is that here's a game that had a lot of promise and a lot of stuff behind it. Very similar situation. You have a developer that everyone knows and loves, BioWare, who you know are capable of making games that are much better to play than what ended up coming and had much more depth. And of course, they just happen to be a similar style of game. They're a looter shooter that lives on a ever-evolving, updating world. So, you know, you have Destiny as the first example. That's probably the closest example. You have No Man's Sky, which is a perfect example of a game that came out, had some stuff where people paid $60 for it at launch, and then the way they had to go about choosing to do things was to update very slowly while they back in the background worked on the catch-all, fix-all that they've continued to do. And did entirely for free. And now here's where these two, Destiny and No Man's Sky, first go into the thing. One of the big problems with Destiny is that Destiny's fix was almost entirely behind a paywall of the Taken King. Now, that one's the real interesting part. So if you look at these two, you have one that's probably the most similar example, but that chose to be fixed by a paywall. Mm-hmm. Hey, here's a game that is actually, and as someone who finally broke down and played it, The Taken King was clearly the saving grace moment for that series. Yeah. But you had to pay $40 at launch.
I don't think, though, that any of us paid full price for Destiny at launch, though. Or not even at launch. I don't think any of us paid. Did you pay $60 for Destiny?
No, I did not. I paid $20. $20.
Yeah, I was gonna say I paid. I think it was actually $20 at the time.
But I had a gift card. I paid $10. It was on sale for $50 at Best Buy.
No, you're talking about the Taken King.
No, I'm talking about the original Destiny 1.
I paid $20, and I don't remember how.
When we were playing it on Xbox One.
Yeah.
So my story for that is that I had pre-ordered the Majora's Mask 3DS, new 3DS XL. Best Buy let me go through, but then messed up and let more people
I
pre-order
remember
than they
this
had
now,
allotted.
yeah.
So they gave me a $50 Best Buy gift card. It was not on sale for $50. It was $60. I paid $10 out of pocket for it. All I did was like, well, this is money I just got for free anyway. Y'all were wanting to play it, so I went and got it and paid $10 out of pocket. And I was really like, I remember when I beat the game, I said, I'm so glad I did not pay $60 for that.
Joe gave me $40 for that game. That's what it was.
You got a good friend.
I told no. Joe wanted me to play on Xbox, which Joe only played with me once or twice on Xbox. Joe wanted me to play, and Joe offered to give me. He said, "Give me $20 and I'll get you the game." And I think he used his technical, like his Best Buy.
Discount and stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus the game. He had just, and I remember this now. He had just signed up for the Best Buy game reward thing they did for a while back.
Yeah.
It was like 20% off a game, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, right. I remember I paid $20 for Destiny, which I didn't have a problem paying $40 for Taken King. Also, I was on another platform, and I don't even remember buying Destiny 1 on PS4.
No, you got it with the Taken King.
Okay, so then
you bought the
sense.
full bundle that came out for $60. So you actually spent $60.
So I actually did end up spending $60, which at that point was worth it. But see, this kind of goes back into it. I spent $80 total for that experience, which is worth it in the end. But with Final Fantasy, this is where Final Fantasy 15 gets me. You had to have the season pass for $20, and if you didn't, you still had to pay $5 per episode, so $20 anyways. But then Royal Edition comes out that's not part of the season pass at all. But if you had the season pass, you get the Royal Pack for $5 cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to try and not go too far.
I've already done the math. $105 total for Royal Edition and everything.
So, but going back to my original point, the thing about Destiny is that they chose to fix it in what I think is the worst way possible in terms of the optics that you get from a PR standpoint. But since Destiny, for some reason, even though it was a very similar situation to No Man's Sky and Anthem at launch, these types of games were newer. So Destiny kind of got the idea of like, well, hey, you know what? This is not a type of game we've seen done before. So we give them a little bit of a slide, and here we are. At least in the long run, we got a good game. So the problem with Anthem versus Destiny is that Anthem was a game that's coming in on the same style that Warframe, Destiny, The Division had all come through and pioneered in their own ways and faltered in their own ways, and then eventually got back on their feet. And then the thought process behind Anthem was, well, okay, this game should come out. And I fell victim to this. I thought, clearly, when you have this many games to look at, you can launch in a much stronger state than any of those did. And in some ways, I think that was true. In some ways, it was false.
Well,
me.
I think they all launched, like, because you look at all these games that a launch lineup too, and you're like, oh, these games are all competing, which means they're all pretty on par with quality. And then you look at, well, technically, Division was broken at launch.
Yeah.
Destiny was broken at launch. Warframe was, I think, the only one that was not broken.
It wasn't broken. It was
just
a simple.
fair.
It was a simple. And then Anthem was, in some shapes and forms, broken at launch. And I got really lucky and got to play the majority of it without problems. But
didn't you get the platinum for that game?
Yes, I did. I really enjoyed the game. That's the crazy thing. Just like with Destiny, in the long run, you end up enjoying it. But to go back to my point in this very free-flowing episode, the third example is Final Fantasy XIV Online. All right, those are the three prime examples that are the most close to what's going on here. So that means that you also have three different plans of attacks of how you do it, right? Mm-hmm. Destiny was, hey, we're going to charge you for it. It's going to be $40 if you already own the game, or $60 if you want to, like if you'd never bought anything, which is good. It means if you never bought the game, the fix was essentially no extra cost to you. But if you bought the game, you had to pay for the fix. So with that in mind, when you're looking at it, you have one that's paid, but very quick, 1 year. They turned Destiny's fate around in 1 year, a little over 1 year. Then you have No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky chose to do it for absolutely free.
But took 2 years.
But took roughly 2 years to get to the point that everybody really wanted it to be. But decent updates throughout the time. So, kind of more similar to what Anthem is probably really doing. Small events and updates and stuff to try and appease the people who are still willing to play it while they wait to make it more appealing to everybody to come back in a new audience.
I do think, though, that BioWare's name being in the mix is what causes people not to have the same temperaments as they did with No Man's Sky.
Yes,
where people
absolutely.
actually kind of thought, oh, they're working on it, it'll be fine. Some people thought they took money and ran with, but there it's like, oh, it's BioWare, EA.
No Man's Sky got that they took the money and ran because it was an unknown quantity for most people.
I did see a lot of people say, though, that they are working on it silently. And that ended up being true.
Yes,
I never believed
and
that.
I believed it was. I kept thinking, there's no way, because you saw the way he talked. It was like he clearly wanted this game to be this, and I think he was getting pressured into saying it was more.
I think
than
Sony
it
was putting the pressure on him,
and who knows?
Release it.
But the third game, of course, and the most drastic example of this is Final Fantasy XIV, like we talked about, and that is a game that originally came out in 2010 and did not relaunch until 2015. 14 maybe. So again, you're talking about multiple years, completely restarting the game from the ground up and essentially paying for twice the development, right? And then and here's the thing for 14. If you bought 14, the original plan was for it to be a subscription-based game, just like 11 Online was. It was received so poorly at launch and had so many issues that anybody who bought 14, the original version, could continue to play the game if they chose to do so for completely free up until we finally got A Realm Reborn. And A Realm Reborn said you didn't have to buy the game again. All it did was update your game, but then you had to start paying for the subscription.
Yeah.
But I think it gave you a free month, actually, if you were one of the original purchasers. So my point being here is that you have three very different plans of attacks. You have one that is paid, but is very quick, 1 year in the ballpark of half of the cost of the game. Then you have 2 years, a little more time, but completely free. Then you have essentially completely free, but 4 years and a drastic overhaul that is unlike anything. No Man's Sky has continued to do that, but they chose to do one release that really brought the game up and in a good spot for people's eyes, and then every year just continue to do something big to it. So No Man's Sky is like the perfect in-between of all those. But now it comes down to which one's most important for Anthem. Well, we already clearly know that it's not going to be the 1 year thing, because here we are at the 1 year anniversary and the fix is not ready.
Yeah.
But that's okay. So now we go towards the thing of my landing answer has to be that this has to be free.
It does, and
this is at the point where now it's
detrimental.
Too long. I think that you'd have a better chance at telling people to, hey, pay $20 to $30 for this, and this is going to be the same amount of quantity as the first game of content. You're going to have a whole new storyline and all this stuff, as well as fixes for the new stuff or for the old stuff and all this new stuff. But it's going to be $30, $40, whatever. But it only took us a year because we really dug in and did this, and that's where the money was going after. It was us making sure that we could pay these people to go in and fix this game. Well, now you're kind of at the standpoint of we're past a year, we're coming up to a year. There is no dead plan of when this stuff is coming, and we don't quite. And it's not even like a breakdown of what's coming. It's like we understand that it's got to be all different, and we're working on that, which all sounds great. It does, but it sounds great in a very vague way.
Yeah.
So
and it's one of those that, like, it sounds great, yet I will put money in those words when I see it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So for me, I think my thing I kept saying was the PR had to be that this was a free update to make up for all the loads of bad PR they got. And to me, EA would be foolish not to go the No Man's Sky route, because going the Destiny route, Destiny was out before No Man's Sky, and it was the Wild West in terms of this type of game. So there was a lot more that happened. But now that No Man's Sky has come out and showed you what you can do and how strong of a community you can build around a game that once had the majority of the community viciously hating it, it goes to show that with the right moves and the right PR behind it and the right dedication, you can turn this game's fate around. And what you'd essentially do is, for all the people who've already bought the game, you would restore their faith and give them something to play. And for all the people who were on the fence about the game, you would bring in new customers that go, finally, this game is what it should have been, and now I can pay $60 for it and get something really great out of it. And I think you get the best of both worlds. And that's exactly what happened with No Man's Sky. Everyone who bought the game day one on all the hype eventually got a great version of the game. It's unfortunate that they had to pay up front so early, but they at least still had the ability to play a game that was there. And then it gave rise to so many new customers that clearly it was to the benefit of Hello Games, because they are clearly still around working on new games, diversifying who they are as a company, and doing really strongly. So it goes to show that there is a correct way to do this. And if you want the closest chance to success to me, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
No Man's Sky route. It has to be.
So for community's take,
sure,
what do we want to do? I'm thinking, you know what? This episode had lots of news in it. It was loosey-goosey. What if we just did this for every episode?
Well, we will definitely see how that goes down. I guess what I should say is this will be because it's 150 episodes, our community's take is going to be, have you enjoyed the majority of these 150 episodes? And do you think there's anything that you would personally change about the show to make it more enjoyable to you?
Boy, that's going to be... I'm going to let everybody know. We're going to get so many different answers. We're not going to be able to take any of these answers.
No, I love it.
Seriously.
I want to see it because I want to see how many people go, Brett is too fence-sitting, Saul's too crazy, or something wild. I don't care. You just tell me.
Saul hates Sony, and he's an Xbox sleeper agent.
He's an X-bot.
He's an X-bot in disguise.
But anyway, that's where we are. And I mean, it's a weird community stake, but when we're doing a celebratory episode like this that doesn't have a main topic, I mean, I guess it could have been about Anthem, but it just seems at this point.
I got a fun thing. You got a free 30 minutes when we're done?
Sure.
You want to go to Walmart and see if I can find the back buttons for the PS4 controller?
Oh, yeah. Saul's had the adventure of not being able to find these.
Oh, yeah. It's pissing me off because people are saying that they're limited in production. And it's like, okay, so now the scalpers are getting them. But I'm going to post a fun little Twitter status saying, yes, I did find them, or no, I didn't. And only people who watch to the end will understand what that meant because I'm going to be very vague about it. But we thank you all for 150 episodes. We hope you enjoy the show. I'll let Brett take us to our wonderful Patreon subscribers. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Love you. Thanks to our patrons, Dan Barber, Josh Jarrell, Matthew Green. My name is Dan Douglas Below, Sean Santarud, Eric McAllister, Matt Sycamore, Funk Turkey, Danny Villalobos, Shadowist, Steven Salazar, The Stoner, Travis Blow, Eduardo Palomino, Stefan Swanland, Coy Live, Philip Laguerre, Corey Hickerson, Solitary Red, Brian, Donovan Williams, William Digital Spooker, Derek Porter, Josh Ayers, Brandon Edwards, Sean One Neo, Tyler Powers, Dylan Kirby, and Sand Coffin. I keep forgetting to take on there. So free shout out to our boy Chad. And lastly, if you are a patron who has been wondering about the cases, I've just been incredibly busy. I will be posting about those very soon, and we'll start working on the ones for this quarter. But we love you. We thank you. If you'd like to support the show, go over to patreon.com/Nartech. Thanks.
Oh.